My parents lied about my sibling. Turns out they never existed. I was 13 when I started questioning everything. Growing up, I had always heard about my older brother, Daniel. My parents spoke of him in passing, like a ghost lingering in our home. Daniel used to love that book, my mom would say when I picked up The Hobbit. Your brother was always great at math. My dad would remind me whenever I struggled with fractions. But there were no pictures of Daniel. No old toys, no childhood drawings, no birthday cards from distant relatives. Just stories. At first, I didn't question it. I assumed he had died young, maybe before I was born. But whenever I asked, my parents would deflect. It's too painful to talk about, Mom would whisper. Then, on a rainy November afternoon, I found something strange. I was helping Mom clean the attic when I stumbled upon an old photo album. Inside were pictures of my parents in their younger years, smiling at the beach, posing at their wedding, and celebrating my first birthday. But there was no Daniel. Not in a single picture. My stomach twisted. Had they hidden them away? That night, I did something I'd never done before. I searched the house for proof of my brother's existence. Drawers, closets, basement boxes, nothing. And then I checked the old filing cabinet in Dad's office. Inside, I found my birth certificate. And only mine. No record of a Daniel. That's when I confronted them. Where are Daniel's records? I asked, my voice shaking. My parents exchanged a look. A long, terrifying look. Sweetheart, Mom said slowly, reaching for my hand. There is no Daniel. I laughed nervously. What do you mean? Dad sighed. We made him up. The air was sucked from my lungs. Why would you do that? My voice was barely a whisper. Mom swallowed hard. When you were little, you had an imaginary friend. A brother. You called him Daniel. You talked about him all the time. We thought it was cute. But then one day you stopped mentioning him. And she hesitated, eyes glassy. We just kept pretending. Why? I asked again, my heartbeat hammering. Dad ran a hand through his graying hair. We were trying to help you. You were lonely as a child, and we didn't want you to feel like you lost someone. We thought keeping him alive in stories would comfort you. I felt sick. But I remember things, I whispered. I remember playing with him, racing him in the yard, him teaching me how to climb the tree. We never had another child, Dad said softly. Daniel was never real. I felt my reality shatter around me. Because if Daniel never existed, then who was I remembering? And why, that night, did I hear someone whisper my name in the dark? That night, I barely slept. Every shadow in my room felt like it was watching me. Every creak in the house sent chills down my spine. My parents' words echoed in my head. Daniel was never real. But how could that be? I remembered him so clearly. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push the memories away. But they came rushing back. Daniel and I sitting on the back porch sharing secrets. Him pushing me higher on the swing. His voice, warm and familiar, whispering, "Don't be scared." A shiver crawled up my spine. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. Then I heard it. A whisper. My name. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The room was dark, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like I wasn't alone. Slowly, I turned my head toward the closet. The door was open. I was sure I had closed it before bed. A cold breeze brushed against my cheek, even though my window was shut. Daniel? The name escaped my lips before I could stop it. Silence. Then, soft footsteps. I scrambled for the lamp and flicked it on. Nothing. The room was empty, but the closet door was now wide open. I stared into the darkness, my pulse hammering. I wanted to believe my parents. I wanted to believe Daniel was never real. But if that were true, who had just whispered my name? The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. At school, in the hallways, even in the mirror of the bathroom, I felt it. Something just beyond my vision. That night, I decided to test a theory. I set up my phone camera before going to sleep, pointing it at my closet. If something was messing with me, I wanted proof. I woke up to the sound of something scraping against my floor. Slow, deliberate. I couldn't move. My body was frozen with fear. Then, a whisper. "Why did you forget me?" I gasped, lunging for the lamp. Light flooded the room. Empty. Shaking, I grabbed my phone and checked the recording. The footage showed me falling asleep. Hours passed in silence. Then, around 3:12 a.m., the closet door creaked open on its own. And then, something stepped out. It was blurry, shifting, like a shadow that didn't belong. It stood at the foot of my bed, unmoving, watching me. Then, just before I woke up, it leaned down, right next to my ear. The last thing caught on camera? A whisper. "Don't forget me again." I dropped the phone, my breath shallow. Daniel wasn't imaginary, and he was angry. My hands trembled as I replayed the video. The whisper sent shivers through me. Don't forget me again. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, a glitch, anything but what it looked like. A shadow standing at my bedside, whispering in my ear. Daniel was never real. My parents said so. But then who or what was in that video? I couldn't go back to sleep. I spent the rest of the night scouring the internet for anything that could explain what was happening to me. False memories, sleep paralysis, ghostly attachments. Nothing quite fit. Then, something caught my attention. A forum thread titled "Imaginary Friends That Weren't Imaginary." Most of the stories were harmless. Kids claiming to see people who weren't there, only to grow out of it. But then I found one story eerily similar to mine. A girl had an older brother no one else remembered. She described playing with him, talking to him, until one day her parents insisted he had never existed. Then, years later, she started seeing something lurking in the dark. The last line made my blood run cold. If they tell you he wasn't real, don't believe them. It makes them angry. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I stormed into the kitchen, my phone in hand. I have proof. My mom turned from the stove, startled. "What are you talking about?" I showed her the video. The moment she saw the shadowy figure, her face paled. Dad leaned in, his jaw tightening. "That's..." He stopped himself, exhaling sharply. "It's just a trick of the light." I shook my head. "Then explain this." I rewound to the part where the closet door opened by itself. "This isn't normal." Mom looked at Dad, her hands shaking. "We need to tell her." I straightened. "Tell me what?" Dad let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. We didn't exactly lie to you." I stared at him, heart pounding. "You did have a brother once." The world tilted. Mom swallowed hard. "His name wasn't Daniel. His name was Nathan." The name sent a shock through my body. A new memory surfaced, an echo of laughter, of someone calling my name, of a boy just a little older than me. "Nathan, you were too young to remember what happened," Dad said. "Nathan, he disappeared when you were 3. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Disappeared? Mom's eyes welled up. One night he was in his room, and then he wasn't. There was no sign of a break-in, no evidence. It was like he just vanished. I gripped the counter for support. "And you just pretended he never existed?" Mom sobbed. "We had no choice. We were breaking apart. The grief, the guilt, it was too much. So we erased him. We told ourselves you were an only child." My head spun. Nathan wasn't imaginary. He was real, and he was trying to reach me. That night, I didn't lock my closet. I left it open. I sat on my bed, waiting, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the room grew cold. I felt a presence. The shadows in the corner shifted. And then a voice. Soft. Familiar. "You finally remember me." Tears welled in my eyes. "Natan?" The darkness moved, stepping forward. It was blurry, flickering between something human and something else. "You let them forget me," the voice said. Not angry, just sad. I swallowed. I didn't know. Silence, then, "You have to find me." Chills ran through me. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, the shadows pulled back, retreating into the closet. The door slammed shut. And this time, it didn't open again. The next day, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't crazy. My parents had a son before me, and he was still out there. Somewhere. I didn't know how. I didn't know where. But I was going to find my brother. I barely spoke to my parents the next morning. How could I? They had erased my brother from existence, buried his memory like he was nothing. But I couldn't blame them. Not entirely. If Nathan really disappeared without a trace, I understood why they wanted to pretend he had never existed. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Nathan wanted me to find him. I just had no idea where to start. I decided to go back to the attic. If there was anything left of Nathan, it had to be there. I dug through every box, every forgotten pile of old papers, and just when I was about to give up, I found something. An old shoebox. Inside were a few dusty Polaroid pictures. My breath caught in my throat. They were pictures of a little boy, around 6 years old. Dark hair, bright eyes. He looked like me. Nathan. One picture showed him sitting on a swing in our backyard. Another had him in a blue raincoat holding an umbrella too big for his small hands. But the last one. This one made my stomach drop. It was a picture of Nathan standing in front of our house. But behind him, in the upstairs window, there was a shape. A shadowy figure, just barely visible. I turned the picture over. Scrawled in faded pen were the words, "He is in the between." What did that mean? I stared at the words, my heart pounding. The between? Between what? I needed answers, and there was only one person who might know. Mrs. Callahan. She was our next-door neighbor, an old woman who had lived on our street for decades. If anyone remembered Nathan, it would be her. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, her eyes widened. "Oh my, you look just like him." I swallowed hard. "Like Nathan." She hesitated, then nodded. "Your parents don't talk about him." I know, but I need to know what happened. Mrs. Callahan sighed and motioned for me to come inside. She led me to her living room, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. "I don't know everything," she admitted. "But I remember the night he disappeared." My breath caught. "It was raining," she said. "Your mother put Nathan to bed like any other night. But sometime after midnight, she started screaming. Your father ran in. They searched the house, searched the yard, but he was gone." She looked at me, her wrinkled hands trembling. The strange thing is, the front door was still locked. All the windows were shut. There was no way for him to have left the house. My stomach churned. Then how did he disappear? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Some say, he was taken. I leaned forward. By who? She exhaled slowly. There are places in this world, she said carefully, that exist between ours. Not quite here, not quite gone. Some call it the veil. Some call it the in-between. And sometimes, people slip through. A chill ran down my spine. He is in the between. You think that's what happened to Nathan? I whispered. She nodded. I always did. I left her house with my mind spinning. If Nathan had been taken to this in-between place, was he trying to reach me from the other side? Was that why I could hear him? See him? That night, I did something reckless. I opened my closet door and sat in front of it, just like I had when I was little. "Nathan," I whispered. "Are you there?" The air grew cold. A whisper. Soft, distant. "I don't have much time." I held my breath. "Where are you?" "Between." His voice was barely a breath. "Find the door." "What door?" I whispered, but the closet suddenly slammed shut. I jumped back, my heart racing. But this time, something was different. Carved into the wood of the closet door, scratched in deep, jagged letters, was a single word. Attic. I ran upstairs, my hands shaking. The attic was cold and silent, the air thick with dust. I swept my flashlight around, searching for anything out of place. And then I saw it. A small wooden door in the far corner. A door I had never noticed before. I stepped toward it, heart pounding. My fingers wrapped around the handle. It was freezing. I took a deep breath and turned the knob. The door creaked open. And on the other side was not my attic. It was something else. A place shrouded in fog, stretching into darkness. A place that felt wrong. A whisper drifted from the other side. "You found me." And then I saw him. Nathan, standing in the mist, reaching for me. And I knew, if I stepped through that door, I might never come back. But I had to make a choice, because my brother was still trapped. And I wasn't going to leave him behind this time. I stood at the threshold of the attic door, staring into the endless fog. The air beyond was dense, humming with something unnatural. The in-between. And Nathan was in it. He stood a few feet away, his face flickering like an old VHS tape, shifting between the boy I remembered and something older, something wrong. "You found me," he whispered again. His voice was layered, as if two people were speaking at once. I hesitated. "Nathan, is it really you?" His expression darkened. "Don't you recognize me?" I did, and I didn't. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to slam the door and pretend I never saw this place. But I had spent too long denying the truth. Nathan was real, and he was trapped. "Step through," he urged. "You can help me." I swallowed hard. "How do I know I can trust you?" Nathan's face twitched. "I'm your brother." His voice cracked. "They let you forget me, but I never forgot you." Guilt tightened in my chest, but something still felt off. I glanced down. Nathan's shadow was wrong. It stretched unnaturally, shifting, twisting, like something else was lurking just beneath his skin. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Something wasn't right. "Nathan," I said slowly, "why did you tell me to find the door?" His expression darkened. "Because I need you to open it." "But it's already open," I pointed out. He went still. And that's when I realized he couldn't cross through. The in-between wasn't just keeping him inside, it was keeping him out. I took a step back, my pulse hammering. "Nathan," I whispered, "what happens if I step through?" He blinked once, twice. Then, too slowly, he smiled. "You won't have to leave me again." That was the moment I knew. The thing standing in the fog wasn't my brother. I lunged for the door, gripping the knob to slam it shut. But something grabbed me. A freezing skeletal hand clamped around my wrist, dragging me forward. My feet scraped against the attic floor as I fought against the pull. "Don't leave me!" The thing wailed, its voice splintering into dozens of whispers. I gasped, panic rising. "You're not my brother!" It laughed. Not a child's laugh. Not Nathan's laugh. Something ancient. Hungry. "No," it rasped. "But he is." And then, behind the fog, deeper in the darkness, a second figure appeared. Smaller. Weaker. A boy. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't flicker. He didn't shift. He looked real. "Help me," the boy whispered. His voice was thin, weak, so different from the things still clinging to me. My chest tightened. Nathan. The real Nathan. The monster had been keeping him here. I had to get him out. I made a split-second decision. Instead of pulling away, I lunged forward, yanking my wrist free and grabbing Nathan's hand. His fingers were ice cold, but they curled around mine desperately. The monster shrieked, a sound so inhuman it made my teeth rattle. The fog churned violently, tendrils lashing out as I pulled Nathan toward the door. "No," the thing howled. "He is mine." I didn't look back. I couldn't. Nathan stumbled forward, his grip tightening around mine. The fog clawed at our legs, trying to drag him back, but I held on with everything I had. We crossed the threshold. The moment Nathan's foot touched the attic floor, the door slammed shut behind us. The attic was silent. The door was gone. Only the wooden wall remained, as if the entrance to the in-between had never been there at all. Nathan stood beside me, shaking. His face was pale, but his real, human eyes, were filled with something I hadn't seen before. Relief. He turned to me, his voice hoarse. "You remembered me?" Tears blurred my vision. I'll never forget again. A small, broken smile crossed his face. Footsteps pounded up the attic stairs. My parents. When they saw Nathan, my mother let out a choked sob, covering her mouth in shock. Dad took an unsteady step forward. It's not possible." But it was. Nathan was home. And the thing that had taken him? It was gone. It took time for my parents to accept what had happened. They didn't fully understand it. None of us did. But they didn't question it. They just held Nathan, crying, whispering apologies over and over. We never spoke about the in-between again. The door never reappeared. And at night, I no longer heard whispers in the dark. But sometimes, just sometimes, I wonder if something is still waiting on the other side, waiting for another forgotten child to slip through, waiting for a new name to whisper in the dark. But I don't listen anymore. I never listen. Because I remember. And I'll never let them take him again. Nathan was home. That should have been the end of the nightmare. But something still didn't feel right. The first few days after Nathan's return were strange. My parents treated him like porcelain, constantly checking on him, making sure he ate, asking him if he needed anything. And Nathan? He barely spoke. He wasn't the lively, laughing boy from the pictures I found. He was quiet, observant. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, I caught him staring. At me, at our parents, at the closet door in his room. And at night, I heard him whispering. Not to me. Not to my parents. To someone else. One evening, I found him sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the old swing set. He hadn't touched it. "Natan?" I hesitated. "Are you okay?" He didn't look at me. "I don't belong here." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" Nathan finally turned his head, his expression unreadable. "How do you know I'm the real one?" I felt my blood run cold. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I hadn't even considered that possibility. I had assumed I saved my brother. But what if I didn't? What if the real Nathan was still in the in-between? And what if the thing standing in front of me was something else? That night, I crept into Nathan's room. He was sleeping, his breathing slow and steady. I glanced at his closet door. Something told me to open it. I reached for the handle. But before I could turn it, a whisper drifted from the other side. "Let me out." I stumbled back, my heart pounding. I spun around to Nathan, and he was awake, sitting up in bed, watching me. His lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. "Go back to sleep, sis." I swallowed hard, backing out of the room. Nathan was home. But I was no longer sure if that was a good thing. Nathan's words haunted me. "How do you know I'm the real one?" I tried to ignore it. I tried to convince myself I had saved my brother, but deep down I knew something was wrong. And then, the final proof came. The other Nathan one night, I woke up to a sound. A soft tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The noise was coming from my closet. I swallowed hard. Natan? Silence. I slid out of bed, my breath shaky. I reached for the closet door, and before I could touch it, a whisper drifted through. It's not me. My stomach dropped. I yanked the door open. And there, inside my closet, was Nathan. Pale, thin, his eyes hollowed with exhaustion. His clothes were the same ones he had been wearing the day I pulled him out of the in-between. But he was the real one. My legs nearly gave out. Natan? I choked. He nodded, his voice barely a breath. You brought the wrong one back. A chill spread through my body. I spun around. And there, standing in my doorway, was the other Nathan. His smile was too wide. His eyes gleamed in the dark. That's not possible, he whispered. But I could see it now. The thing wearing my brother's skin. It tilted its head, its voice shifting, deepening. You were supposed to forget, it hissed. You were supposed to believe. Nathan grabbed my wrist. Closed the door. The thing in my doorway lunged. I slammed the closet shut. The house shook. A horrible screeching sound tore through the air. The walls trembled, and for a split second, I felt reality twist. And then, silence. I turned around. The closet was empty. The fake Nathan was gone. And the real one? He was still here. Breathing. Real. I collapsed, pulling him into a hug, tears streaming down my face. It was over. The thing that had taken his place, the thing that had tried to replace him, was gone. But as we sat there in the dark, clutching each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching. Waiting. Because the in-between never lets go completely. And one day, it might try again. I found my boyfriend on Tinder. But the story gets worse. When I first met Jake on Tinder, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. He was charming, had that rugged but sweet look, and actually seemed interested in having real conversations, not just sending winky faces and wide at 2 a.m. After a few weeks of texting, we met in person, and it was even better than I expected. He was funny, attentive, and made me feel like the only girl in the world. For the next 6 months, everything was perfect. We went on spontaneous road trips, had lazy Sunday mornings making pancakes, and he even introduced me to his mom. I was convinced I'd found my soulmate on a dating app. But then, things got weird. One night, we were cuddling on the couch when his phone lit up with a Tinder notification. My heart dropped. He laughed it off, saying it was probably an old notification from before we met. I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me to dig deeper. Later that night, while he was in the shower, I grabbed his phone. My hands were shaking as I opened Tinder. My worst fears were confirmed. He was still active, still swiping, still messaging other girls. I felt sick, but here's where it gets worse. One of the recent messages caught my eye. I had a great time last night. Can't wait to see you again. The timestamp? Last night. While he was supposedly working late. I couldn't breathe. My whole body went numb. But instead of breaking down, I took screenshots, sent them to myself, and put his phone back. I needed a plan. The next day, I invited him over for dinner, pretending like everything was normal. I even dressed up just to make him feel comfortable. And then, halfway through the meal, I casually pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. Recognize these? I asked, my voice steady but cold. His face turned ghost white. He stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but I was done listening. You can leave now, I said, standing up, and take your lies with you. Jake tried to apologize, but I wasn't having it. I blocked him on everything, deleted our photos, and threw out the sweater of his I used to love wearing. But here's the real twist. A few weeks later, a girl DM'd me on Instagram. She'd seen my name in his Tinder messages. Turns out he'd been juggling multiple girls, telling each of us we were the one. We formed a whole group chat of girls he'd played, and together we exposed him. After we exposed Jake in our group chat, things took a turn I never expected. At first, it was kind of fun. Bonding with these girls over our shared betrayal. Laughing at his recycled pickup lines, even making a group playlist called Jake's Greatest Lies, featuring songs like Irreplaceable by Beyoncé and Before He Cheats by Carrie Underwood. But then, weird things started happening. One of the girls, Emily, sent a screenshot in the group chat. Jake had made a new Tinder, with a different name. Same pictures, different bio. But instead of pretending to be some sweet, romantic guy, his bio now read, "Looking for something casual. No drama, just fun." The audacity. We laughed at first, but then Olivia, another girl from the group, said something that made my stomach drop. "I think he knows about this chat." We all froze. Apparently, Jake had messaged her from an unknown number saying, "Hope you had fun with your little witch hunt. You'll regret it." I tried to shake it off. Jake was a liar, sure. But a threat? No way. Then I started getting blocked number calls. At first, I ignored them, assuming they were spam. But then one night, as I was about to fall asleep, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you won, huh?" My blood ran cold. I stared at the message, my fingers shaking over the keyboard. Then another text came through. "Check your car." I practically sprinted to my window. My car was parked right outside my apartment, just like always. But as I squinted in the dim streetlight, I noticed something. All 4 of my tires were slashed. Panic surged through me. I ran back inside, locking the doors, checking the windows. My heart was pounding. Was this just a coincidence? Or was it Jake? I sent a message to the group chat. "Someone slashed my tires." Instantly, the chat blew up. Emily. "What?" Olivia. "Call the police." Now Mia. "It has to be him." I called the cops, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. An officer came by, took some notes, and asked if I had any enemies. I hesitated before saying his name. Jake. That's when the officer's face changed. He let out a deep sigh. "You're not the first girl to say his name." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He rubbed his temple. "There have been reports, other women, harassment, stalking, some even had break-ins, but we've never had enough evidence to charge him." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The officer told me to be careful and to consider staying with a friend for a while. I didn't need to be told twice. I packed a bag and crashed at Olivia's place. The whole time, my mind raced. Who was Jake, really? How many women had he done this to? I wanted to believe that was the worst of it, that he'd get bored and move on. But I was wrong, because the very next night, we heard a noise outside Olivia's apartment. And when we checked the doorbell camera, there he was, standing in the shadows, watching. And he wasn't alone. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. There he was, Jake, standing just outside Olivia's apartment building, half hidden in the shadows. But what made my blood turn to ice? He wasn't alone. There was another guy with him, bigger, bulkier, someone I didn't recognize. We watched as Jake leaned toward the camera, his face just barely visible in the grainy black and white footage. He was smiling. A text popped up on my phone. Unknown number. "Come outside, babe. We just want to talk." Olivia and I grabbed each other's hands, neither of us breathing. Number freaking. "Way," Olivia whispered. "We're calling the cops." I was already dialing. The dispatcher picked up and I explained, my voice shaking, that my psychotic ex was standing outside her place with some random guy. They told us to stay inside, lock the doors, and wait for an officer. I checked the camera feed again. Jake and his friend hadn't moved. They just stood there, waiting. Like they knew we were watching. Then, bang. We both screamed as something slammed against the front door. It was like my worst nightmare had come to life. The doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in. "The cops are coming," I shouted, my voice cracking. A moment of silence. Then Jake's muffled voice. "Shame. We just wanted to say hi." Then laughter. That slow, taunting kind that made my stomach turn. I clutched Olivia's hand so tight my knuckles turned white. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of sirens split through the night. Jake and his friend bolted. By the time the cops arrived, they were already gone. The truth about Jake. We filed a report, showed the officers the texts and the video footage, and I told them everything. The stalking, the slashed tires, the group of girls he had lied to. This time, they took it seriously. Because apparently, Jake had a record. Not just for harassment, for assault. The officer wouldn't give us full details, but I caught the words previous charges and plea deal. My stomach twisted. How had I never known? After that night, I blocked every number, changed my locks, got security cameras installed, and even moved to a new apartment. The other girls from the group chat did the same. Jake disappeared for a while. We stopped seeing his name pop up on dating apps, and it was like he'd vanished. But then, a few months later, Olivia sent a screenshot to our group chat. It was from Tinder, a new profile. Same pictures, different name. But this time, his bio was even creepier. "You can run, but I always find my girls." We reported the profile immediately, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be the last time we'd hear from him. And to this day, I still check my cameras. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That reporting Jake, changing my number, and moving to a new place meant I never had to think about him again. But that would be a lie. Because 2 weeks after Olivia found his new Tinder profile, I got a letter. Not a text. Not a call. An actual handwritten letter. It was slid under my apartment door in the middle of the night. No postage, no return address. Just my name on the front, written in that messy, slanted handwriting I knew all too well. My hands shook as I opened it. "Hey, babe. Thought you could just disappear?" Cute. "I know where you live. I know where you work. You're not that hard to find. I was thinking, maybe we should try again. I mean, we had something special, didn't we? You wouldn't want to make me mad, would you? See you soon." I dropped the letter like it was on fire. My whole body went cold. He found me. I didn't even have time to think. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and my purse and got the hell out of there. I drove straight to Olivia's place, shaking the entire way. When I showed her the letter, her face went pale. "This guy is a full-on psycho," she whispered. "We have to do something." We called the cops again, but because he hadn't physically harmed me, yet, all they could do was file another report. No arrest, no restraining order, just a suggestion to stay somewhere safe and be cautious. I was done waiting for him to make the next move. So we decided to turn the tables. Jake had made a new Tinder, right? Well, so did we. But this time we used a fake profile. A girl named Sophie. She was perfect. Just his type. Brunette. Blue eyes, the kind of girl he always fell for. Olivia and I crafted her profile carefully, making sure she looked real. And then, we swiped right on Jake. It didn't take long. He matched within an hour. Jake. "Hey, gorgeous, where have you been hiding?" Sophie. "Just waiting for the right guy." Jake. "Well, you found him. I wanted to vomit." But we kept going. For days, we led him on, letting him believe he was talking to some sweet, clueless girl. We got him to reveal where he was staying. A motel. Just outside of town. Then, one night, we set up a date. He thought he was meeting Sophie at a bar downtown, but instead, he was met by the police. The final blow, see, while we were texting him, we were also working with a detective who finally took us seriously. The letter had been enough for them to get a warrant. And when they searched his motel room, they found dozens of letters. Not just for me, for multiple girls. Some of them were even worse than mine. Threats, darker stuff. Stuff that made me realize just how dangerous he really was. Jake was arrested that night. This time, he wasn't getting off with just a warning. Epilogue. Moving on. But not forgetting, it took months for me to feel normal again. For a long time, I was always looking over my shoulder, always checking my locks. I even moved again. This time, somewhere far away. But I learned something through all of this. I wasn't just a victim. I fought back. We fought back. And Jake? Well, let's just say he's not on Tinder anymore. For the first time in months, I finally started to breathe again. With Jake in jail, I moved to a new city, started fresh, and tried to put it all behind me. The nightmares didn't go away overnight, and I still jumped at unexpected knocks on my door. But slowly, life went back to normal. Or so I thought. Because 6 months later, I got another letter. No return address. Just my name, written in that same messy handwriting. I almost dropped it right then and there. Jake was in jail. There was no way this could be from him, right? I forced myself to open it, my fingers shaking. Did you really think this was over? My stomach flipped. You put me away. You think that makes you safe? Cute. I have friends. See you soon, babe. I backed away like the paper was poison. My heart pounded in my ears. How? I sat down, gripping the edge of my couch to keep myself from hyperventilating. I grabbed my phone and searched Jake's name. And that's when I saw it. Jake was out, released early, for good behavior. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. How was this even possible? I called Olivia immediately. He's out, I whispered, and I think he found me. Silence on the other end. Then, get out of your apartment. Now. I didn't argue. I grabbed my bag, shoved my laptop and wallet inside, and ran to my car, leaving everything else behind. I drove straight to Olivia's new place, shaking the entire way. When I got there, she was already waiting, pacing the sidewalk. "This is insane," she said as I showed her the letter. He was supposed to be locked up for at least a year. I didn't know what to say. Nothing made sense. But then Mia, one of the other girls from our old group chat, sent a message. Mia. "Guys, I think I saw him." Emily. "What?" Me. "Where?" Mia. "At my gym. I thought I was seeing things. But then he smiled at me, like he wanted me to know he was there." I felt sick. He wasn't just free. He was hunting us. Nowhere was safe. The police wouldn't do anything. Not yet. The detective told me to keep a record of any contact and to file a restraining order. But a piece of paper wasn't going to stop Jake. We needed to stop him first. So we made a plan. We weren't just going to wait for him to come after us. We were going to find out who was helping him. Because Jake wasn't just stalking us anymore. Someone was working with him. And if we didn't figure out who it was, one of us might not survive this time. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. Jake was out. He had help. And now he was making sure we knew it. The next morning, Olivia, Mia, and I met at a cafe, sitting in the corner with our backs to the wall. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped. Was it him? Was he watching? "We need to figure out who's helping him," Mia said, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't taken a sip. "There's no way he got my gym location by accident." Olivia nodded. "And how the hell did he find your new place after you moved twice?" she asked me. I swallowed. Someone's been feeding him information. A chill ran through me. It could be anyone. A mutual acquaintance, a coworker, a friend, or worse. One of the other girls he had dated. We went back to what worked before. If Jake was out and looking for victims, there was a chance he was back on Tinder. This time, we made a new fake profile. Another Sophie. But instead of a random girl, we used a stock photo of someone a little different from his usual type. Someone that wouldn't stand out as bait. Within a day, he matched. "Jake. Haven't seen you around here before?" Sophie? Just moved here. Still figuring out the city. Where's a fun place to go? Jake. I know a place. Maybe I'll take you sometime. I wanted to throw up, but then he sent another message. Jake. Let me ask my friend if she wants to come too. She'd love you. We all froze. This was it. He had someone working with him. Sophie. Ooh, I love new friends. Who is she? Jake. Just someone who helps me out sometimes. You'll meet her soon. I stared at my phone, feeling my stomach drop. We decided to push our luck. Olivia, who was the best at playing the flirty act, took over the Tinder messages. Sophie. Well, tell her I said hi. Maybe we should all meet up this weekend. Jake. Maybe sooner. Where do you live? I nearly threw my phone across the room. Nope. 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 I stood up, pacing. He's testing us. He wants to know where Sophie is. He's looking for a new target, Olivia whispered. Mia chewed her lip. Or he knows it's us, and he's messing with us. Either way, it meant one thing. We didn't have much time. Later that night, I was heading home from Olivia's place when I felt it. That sick, crawling sensation. I was being watched. I glanced at my car's side mirror as I unlocked the door. There, a figure standing under a street lamp, dressed in all black. Hoodie up. I froze. It wasn't Jake. Too tall. Too broad. My chest tightened. His friend. Before I could even think, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I jumped into my car and locked the doors, my hands shaking. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Drive safe, babe. My blood ran ice cold. I floored it out of there. Jake wasn't working alone anymore, and I was officially being hunted. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the black hoodie. I heard Jake's voice in my head, mocking me. You think you're safe? Cute. Number not this time. I was done being scared. We knew one thing for sure. Jake was planning something. He had help, and whoever it was, they were getting too close. So we set a trap. Through the fake Tinder profile, Sophie agreed to meet him at a bar downtown. But when he arrived, he wasn't meeting Sophie. He was meeting us. Mia, Olivia, and I were already inside, hidden in different corners, watching as Jake walked in, scanning the crowd. And he wasn't alone. The man in the black hoodie was with him. I gripped my phone. We had already called the police. All we had to do was wait. But then something went wrong. Jake's phone buzzed and his face twisted. He knew. He looked around, eyes scanning the bar. Then, his gaze locked onto me. The chase. My stomach dropped. Before I could move, Jake started toward me. Fast. I jumped up, shoving past people, heart racing. I heard Olivia yell my name, heard Mia's chair scrape against the floor as she moved, but Jake was too close. I sprinted toward the back exit, but the man in the black hoodie was already there. Blocking the door. Trapped. I turned back, my pulse hammering. Jake was smiling. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? He said, stepping closer. I backed up. You're insane. He shrugged. Maybe, but you made me this way. I clenched my fists. No, Jake, you were always like this. He laughed, low and cruel. Then he nodded at the man beside him. Let's go. The man in the hoodie grabbed my wrist. I screamed. But before he could pull me, before Jake could take me, sirens split the night. The doors burst open. Police. Jake's smile dropped. The man in the hoodie let go of me just as officers tackled him to the ground. Jake tried to run. He made it halfway to the exit before an officer grabbed him, shoving him hard against the wall. No, you don't get to do this to me again. He screamed, thrashing, but it was over. This time, he wasn't getting away. The truth about Jake's friend. It took weeks to untangle everything, but when the truth finally came out, it was worse than I imagined. The man in the hoodie? His name was Darren. He was another one of Jake's victims. A guy Jake had manipulated, blackmailed, and used until he had no choice but to help him. Jake had been building an entire network of people, ex-girlfriends, old friends, lonely strangers, all under his control. And I was supposed to be his final lesson, his warning to the others. But instead, I was the one who stopped him. Jake was sentenced to 10 years. Darren got less time. He had been trapped in Jake's twisted game, just like the rest of us. I moved again, changed my number, and deleted every dating app I ever had. I finally felt safe. But then, 3 months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name, written in that same messy handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. I almost didn't open it. But I did. And inside there was only one sentence. "See you soon, babe." She left me at the altar. So I married her sister instead. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had planned every detail meticulously. The flowers, the music, the perfect venue. The sun was shining through the windows of the old church, casting soft rays onto the polished floors. The guests were seated, their faces beaming with excitement. I stood at the altar, wearing a tuxedo that cost way more than it should have, my palms sweating with nerves. It was finally happening. I was getting married to the woman of my dreams, Isabella. I had known her since college, and we had been together for 5 years. She was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Beautiful, intelligent, funny, and kind. Today, she would walk down the aisle to become my wife. As the music began, I turned to see her at the entrance, dressed in the most exquisite wedding gown. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart skipped a beat. She was radiant, glowing like an angel. The guests stood and whispered, "Wow, she looks incredible." But as she started walking toward me, something felt off. It was hard to put my finger on it, but I could see it in her eyes. There was a hesitation, a doubt. The smile on her face was strained. Her steps were slower than usual, and she kept glancing down, her fingers gripping the bouquet a little too tightly. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. Then, just as she was about to reach me, she stopped. The music faded out, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Isabella looked at me with wide eyes, her mouth opening as if she were going to speak, but couldn't find the words. I stared at her, confused, wondering if this was some sort of joke. Was she nervous? Was this part of some surprise she had planned? But then the words came out, slowly and painfully. I can't do this, Jake." My heart dropped. The blood drained from my face, and I could feel the heat of embarrassment rushing to my cheeks. "What do you mean, Isabella? We've been planning this for months. We've talked about this." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she bit her lip. I'm not ready. I'm sorry, I just can't marry you." The room seemed to spin as the guests muttered in confusion. My stomach twisted even more, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. Was this a bad dream? Why was she doing this to me? She had to be joking. She had to be, but no. It was real. She turned and fled, running down the aisle, leaving me standing at the altar, utterly humiliated. The murmurs in the room were deafening. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. My best man, Tom, stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Jake, man, I'm so sorry. Let's just get you out of here, okay?" But I couldn't move. My mind kept replaying those words, the look on Isabella's face as she left me behind. It didn't make sense. How could she do this to me? I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, their sympathy palpable. "Jake," my sister-in-law Lila whispered, walking over to me. "I'm so sorry. This must be horrible." Lila, Isabella's older sister, was the opposite of her. While Isabella was poised and elegant, Lila was down to earth and full of warmth. She had always been there for me, through thick and thin, even when I didn't deserve it. I had always admired her strength and kindness. I looked at her, my voice barely above a whisper. "What just happened, Lila? Why would she leave me? Lila's eyes softened, and she glanced back toward the door where Isabella had disappeared. Jake, I think you need to talk to her, but maybe not right now. She gave me a reassuring smile before pulling me into a hug. It was the only comfort I had in that moment. The next few days were a blur. I didn't hear from Isabella. I didn't want to hear from her. The sting of rejection was unbearable, and the idea of facing her made my heart ache even more. But through it all, there was Lila. She checked in on me, offering a shoulder to cry on and an ear to listen. We talked about everything. How much it hurt, how confused I was, and how I didn't know what to do next. She was patient, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel alone. And slowly, something changed. One evening, after a long conversation, Lila looked at me with a soft smile. Jake, I've been thinking about something. I raised an eyebrow. What's that? You've been through so much, and you deserve someone who sees you for who you really are. Someone who loves you not just for your good qualities, but for your flaws, too. I chuckled nervously. You mean like you? She laughed, a rich melodic sound that made my heart skip a beat. Maybe. But you need to figure out what you want, Jake. You don't need to rush into anything, but you do need to be honest with yourself. The days turned into weeks, and Isabella never reached out to explain herself. My life, once so full of promise, was now a chaotic mess. Yet, somehow, I felt lighter when Lila was around. We spent more time together, sharing moments that weren't about the heartbreak I had endured. One day, as we sat in a coffee shop, something clicked. Lila looked at me with an intensity I hadn't noticed before. Jake, you've been hurt, but you're still a good person. You still deserve love. I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't just her words. It was the way she said them. The way she looked at me like I wasn't broken, but whole. And in that moment, I realized I had been in love with her all along. Maybe not from the very start, but in the time we had spent together, something had shifted. The love I thought I had for Isabella was nothing compared to what I felt now. Layla, I think I've always loved you, I admitted, my voice trembling. She smiled, her eyes softening. I think I've always loved you too, Jake. And just like that, the piece of my life that had been broken for so long began to heal. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. We took it slow, letting our feelings grow naturally. And a few years later, after a simpler but far more meaningful ceremony, I married Lila. She left me at the altar, and in a strange twist of fate, I found my real happiness not with her, but with the one who had always been there. Her sister. Life, it seemed, had a funny way of working out. As the months went by, I couldn't help but look back on the day Isabella left me at the altar. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet the sting of it all was still there in some quiet corners of my heart. But then I'd look at Lila, and everything would feel like it was exactly how it was meant to be. We had taken our time, allowing our relationship to unfold naturally. There were no grand gestures, no rush. The foundation we built together was rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and friendship. I often wondered how long Lila had known she loved me. Maybe even before I realized it myself. One night, we sat on the porch of our house, the air cool and crisp. A light breeze rustled the leaves in the trees, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. Lila leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped an arm around her. You know, I never thought we'd end up here, she said softly, her voice a little wistful. Neither did I replied with a small chuckle. But I'm glad we did. I'm glad too, she whispered, her hand finding mine. We sat there for a long time, just enjoying the peace before she spoke again. Jake, have you thought about us, taking the next step? I turned to her, the question catching me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, you and me. Forever. A family. She smiled gently, her eyes sparkling with something both hopeful and uncertain. I'm not rushing you. I just want to know if we're on the same page. I squeezed her hand. Lila, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want a future with you. Whatever that looks like, I'm in. Her smile grew wider, and I could see a weight lifting from her shoulders. The love I felt for her, so deep and pure, made my heart feel lighter than ever. We had already been through so much, and here we were, ready to start our lives together. No interruptions, no more questions. Just us. The next year, we bought a little cottage in the countryside. We wanted space to breathe, to build something for ourselves without the shadows of the past hanging over us. It was a fresh start. And though I still thought about Isabella from time to time, wondering where she was, what she was doing, there was no more bitterness, no more pain. My heart belonged to Lila, and I was happier than I ever thought possible. But one evening, as I was preparing dinner, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? Jake? The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Isabella. For a moment, I was frozen, unsure of what to say. The years between us had been long, and I wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation. Yes? I said cautiously, my tone guarded. Jake, I don't know how to say this, but I owe you an apology. Isabella's voice trembled. I've been thinking about everything, and I made the biggest mistake of my life. I took a deep breath, holding the phone tighter in my hand. I don't know what you want from me, Isabella. I don't expect forgiveness, she said quickly. I just need you to know that I was scared. I wasn't ready, and I didn't think you deserved someone like me. But then I watched you with Lila, and I saw how much you both loved each other. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. I don't know what to say. You left me at the altar, Isabella. You broke me, and I've spent years putting myself back together. I know, and I am so sorry for that, she whispered. I was selfish, and I hurt you in the worst way. I'll always regret it. There was a long pause. I thought about what I wanted to say, what I needed to say. But the words wouldn't come. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't sure I could forgive her completely. Not yet. I'm happy now, Isabella, I said quietly, the weight of it all finally sinking in. I've moved on. I'm in love with Lila. She's the one for me. I know, she replied softly. I see that now. And I'm glad you found happiness. We both fell silent for a moment, and then, almost as if we both reached an unspoken understanding, I spoke again. I hope you find happiness too, Isabella. You deserve it. She thanked me, and we ended the call. I sat there for a moment, the phone still in my hand, trying to make sense of everything. I didn't have any more bitterness in my heart, but it didn't erase the hurt. I turned to find Lila standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had heard everything. You okay? She asked quietly, walking over to me. I nodded, though my mind was still spinning. Yeah, it's just a lot to process. She sat down beside me, taking my hand in hers. You don't have to go through it alone, Jake. I'm right here. I smiled, squeezing her hand. I know. I'm so grateful for that. Lila looked at me, her eyes soft with love. We've come a long way, haven't we? We have, I agreed. And no matter what happened before, we've got each other now. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against mine. I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be here. And with that, I finally felt the peace I had been searching for. I had made my mistakes, and so had she. But in the end, we found our way back to each other. And that was all that mattered. The past was the past, and our future was just beginning. Together. As the months passed, life settled into a routine that felt both familiar and new. Lila and I spent our days fixing up the cottage, exploring the nearby trails, and making plans for the future. It was a simple life, but it was ours. And that's all that mattered to me. We talked about everything: our hopes, our dreams, our fears, and the more we shared, the stronger our bond grew. It was like we were rediscovering each other every day, falling deeper in love with every moment. But despite how perfect everything felt, a nagging thought lingered in the back of my mind. Isabella's call had left me unsettled, like I had unfinished business. Lila noticed the change in me one evening while we were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I hadn't said much that day, lost in thought. "Jake," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "You've been quieter than usual. Is something on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment before sighing. "It's just the phone call. Isabella's apology. I thought I had closed that chapter, but I'm not sure I have. It feels like there's still a piece of me that hasn't let go." Lila's expression softened, and she reached out to take my hand. "I understand. But you've come so far, Jake. We've come so far. Whatever happened with Isabella doesn't change what we have now." "I know," I replied, my voice heavy with emotion. "And I don't want to lose what we have. I don't want to go back to that place, but sometimes it feels like I'm carrying it around with me, like a weight I can't shake off." Lila squeezed my hand reassuringly. "I'm not asking you to forget, Jake. You've been through a lot, and it's okay to have those feelings, but I think it's time to truly let go of the past. I'm here with you, every step of the way." Her words were like a balm for my soul. Lila had always been the steady, grounding force in my life, and I realized then that it wasn't just about moving on. It was about moving forward together. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt before. I knew what I needed to do. It wasn't about trying to fix the past. It was about closing the door on it, once and for all, and focusing on the future I wanted with Lila. That afternoon, I went to a small cafe in town. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and I scanned the room until I saw her sitting at a corner table, staring into her coffee cup. "Isabella." She looked up when she heard me approach, her eyes wide with surprise, and for a moment the air between us was thick with unspoken words. It had been years since we'd seen each other in person, and yet it felt like no time had passed at all. "Jake," she said, her voice tentative, "I didn't expect you to come." I sat down across from her, my hands resting on the table. "I needed to. There are things I still need to say." Isabella nodded, her eyes searching my face as if trying to gauge what was going through my mind. "I don't blame you if you hate me for what happened," she said quietly. "I don't know how to make it right, but I needed to tell you again. I'm sorry." I took a deep breath, thinking about all the hurt, the confusion, and the years I spent trying to figure out why she left. "You hurt me, Isabella, but I've had time to think, and I've come to realize something important. What happened wasn't just about you leaving me. It was about me holding on to something that wasn't meant to be." She blinked, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I understand. You deserve someone who knows what they want." "I know that now," I said firmly, "and I've found that someone." There was a pause, and when she looked up at me again, there was no anger or resentment in her eyes, only understanding. "I'm glad for you, Jake. I really am." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. I needed to hear that. I think I've spent so much time trying to make sense of what happened, but the truth is, it's just part of the past. It doesn't define me anymore. And it doesn't define us. Isabella gave a small, sad smile. "I've been holding on to it too, in my own way. But you're right. It's time to let go." We sat there in silence for a few moments, and then, without another word, we both stood up. She gave me a brief, almost apologetic hug, and I returned it. Gently, but with finality. When I left the cafe, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had finally let go of the past, and with it, the weight that had been dragging me down. It was time to focus on the life that was waiting for me. As I drove back to the cottage, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lila. "I'm so proud of you. I love you." I smiled as I typed back. "I love you too. and I'm ready for our future. With you. That evening, after dinner, we sat on the porch again. The stars were brighter than usual, and the cool night air wrapped around us like a blanket. Lila turned to me, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. Jake, I know you've been through so much, but I want you to know that no matter what, I'll always be here. We've built something beautiful together, and I'm not going anywhere. I kissed her gently, my heart full of everything I needed. You're my home, Lila. My heart is yours. And as I held her in my arms, I knew that no matter where life took us, the past was finally behind me. We were ready for whatever the future held. Together. The seasons passed, each day blending into the next as Lila and I settled deeper into our life together. Our little cottage in the countryside became a symbol of everything we had built. Our love, our healing, and the future we had chosen to embrace. We spent our days planting flowers in the garden, hiking the nearby trails, and making plans for things like vacations, anniversaries, and eventually, family. It was a life I hadn't dared to imagine just a few years ago. A life that felt like a dream. But it was real. Every day with Lila was a reminder of how far we had come, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for every moment. One Saturday morning, as the sun peeked over the hills, Lila and I were sipping coffee on the porch. The air was crisp, and the scent of fresh earth filled the breeze. It was one of those mornings that made you feel like anything was possible. Lila set down her cup, her eyes gleaming with excitement. Jake, I was thinking, what if we take the next step? I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? You know, she said, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of her coffee mug. Maybe it's time to start thinking about having kids. The question hung in the air, heavier than it seemed at first. I hadn't expected it, but as I sat there, processing her words, I realized that I had been thinking about it too. The idea of having a family with Lila seemed both thrilling and terrifying, but in the best possible way. You're right, I said after a moment of consideration. We've talked about it before, but I think now feels like the right time. We've built something solid, and I want to share that with a little one. Lila smiled, her eyes softening. I've always wanted to be a mom, Jake, and I can't imagine doing it with anyone else. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. You're going to be an amazing mom, and I'll be right there with you, every step of the way. The thought of becoming parents was both overwhelming and exciting, but we were ready. We had learned to be patient with each other, to communicate openly, and to love unconditionally. Together, we could handle whatever came our way. That afternoon, we took a walk through the town, talking more about the future. We discussed the little things, like the kind of house we'd want to buy when we needed more space, and the bigger things, like what kind of parents we hoped to be. We even joked about what our future kids might be like, whether they'd take after her or me, or a bit of both. But as we wandered through the park, we were interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Jake? Lila? We turned to see a familiar face, one I hadn't seen in months. It was Isabella. Her appearance caught me off guard. She was standing a few feet away, her expression uncertain as she shifted on her feet. I hadn't seen her since that cafe meeting, and the sudden presence of her brought a rush of memories, both painful and healing. Lila, ever gracious, smiled warmly and waved. Isabella, it's been a while. How have you been? Isabella gave a tentative smile, her eyes glancing at me, then back to Lila. I've been okay. I heard you two were living out here, and I thought I'd come by and see how things were going. Lila and I exchanged a glance. This wasn't something we had planned for, but Lila's warmth was unwavering. It's good to see you. What's been going on in your life? Isabella took a deep breath before speaking. Actually, I wanted to apologize again. I know we've already talked, but I think I've been holding on to guilt for way too long. I left things between us unresolved, and I didn't want to just disappear. I wanted to make sure you knew. I'm sorry. For everything. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and though the past was still there, it no longer had the power to hurt me. I had forgiven her years ago. After all, we'd both moved on. But I knew Lila needed to hear that apology too, even if it was just for closure. Lila, I don't expect anything from you, Isabella said, turning to her. I just wanted you to know how much I regret how I hurt you both. Lila gave her a small, understanding smile. Thank you, Isabella. It means a lot to hear you say that. We stood there in an awkward silence for a moment, and then, as if by unspoken agreement, we all nodded and said our goodbyes. There was no animosity, no lingering tension, just a quiet acknowledgement of the past. As Isabella walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the last piece of unfinished business, the final thread that needed to be tied. And with that, I could feel the weight of everything truly lifting off my shoulders. I had let go, not just of the past, but of any lingering bitterness. It was time to embrace the future fully. Later that night, after a quiet dinner at home, Lila and I sat on the couch together. Her head rested against my chest as we watched a movie, the warmth between us undeniable. You know, Jake, Lila said softly, I think this is the happiest I've ever been. And I can't wait for everything that's to come. The family we'll build, the memories we'll make. I'm so glad we're in this together. I kissed the top of her head, my heart full. Me too. I wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. And as I held Lila in my arms, I realized that the journey had led me exactly where I was meant to be. The twists, the turns, the heartbreak. It had all shaped who I had become. And now, with Lila by my side, I was ready to face whatever the future held. Months passed, and the rhythm of our life continued to unfold with a peacefulness I hadn't known before. Lila and I spent our days getting ready for the life we had planned together. We continued to make small changes to the house, painting walls, planting trees in the yard, and imagining what it would be like when we filled the house with the laughter of children. But it wasn't just the physical space that was evolving. We were evolving too. There was an ease to being with Lila now. No more walls between us, no more unresolved questions. I knew we were ready for the next chapter of our story. We had both made peace with the past and focused on the future. One chilly evening in November, Lila and I were sitting on the porch again. This time, there was an added excitement in the air. We had been trying for a few months now, and there was an energy between us. Something new, something hopeful. Lila leaned over and touched my hand. Jake, I have something I need to tell you. I looked at her, heart racing with a mixture of curiosity and excitement. What is it? Her eyes sparkled and she smiled, almost like she was keeping a secret. I'm pregnant. For a moment, the world felt like it had frozen. I stared at her, a mix of shock and joy flooding through me. Then, my heart leapt, and I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, a deep, breathless sound that echoed in the quiet of the night. You are... really? I finally managed to get out, still in disbelief. Lila nodded, her eyes filled with warmth. Yes, Jake, we're going to be parents. I stood up from the chair and pulled her into my arms, lifting her off the ground in a spontaneous hug. It felt as if everything we had worked for, everything we had dreamed of, was coming to fruition in that moment. The future we had talked about, the family, the home, the life we would share, was finally becoming real. I can't believe it, I whispered. I'm going to be a dad. And I'm going to be a mom, Lila said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. We stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, feeling the weight of the moment. And though the journey hadn't always been easy, this was the moment that made it all worth it. The past, the pain, the heartache, all of it had led to this perfect moment. And in that instant, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. In the following months, our lives took on a new urgency. We prepared for the arrival of our baby with more excitement than I had ever imagined. There were nurseries to decorate, baby clothes to buy, and all the questions that came with it. Would it be a boy or a girl? What kind of parent would I be? What kind of parent would Lila be? But every day, as we planned and dreamed, I found myself more and more certain that I was exactly where I needed to be. This was my life now. Not with Isabella, not with anyone else. With Lila, the woman who had stood by me, loved me, and given me a second chance at happiness. The night before the baby was due to arrive, Lila and I sat on the porch again, looking up at the stars. There was a calm in the air, a tranquility that came from knowing we had everything we needed. I can't believe tomorrow is the day, Lila said, resting her head on my shoulder. I know, I replied, running my fingers through her hair. It feels like we've been waiting for this moment forever, but now that it's here, I'm ready. Lila smiled up at me. You know, I think we've come so far. From everything that happened before to this moment right now, I feel like it's all led to us being here. I know, I said, my voice soft. I wouldn't change a thing. Not a single moment. Because it all led me to you. She turned her face up to mine, her eyes filled with love. I'm glad we found each other. I'm glad we never gave up. As the night deepened, I held her close, knowing that tomorrow would change everything. And no matter what came next, no matter how difficult or challenging things might get, we would face it together. Because that was the most important thing. We had each other. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, we were on our way to the hospital. It was happening. We were about to become parents. I held Lila's hand as we navigated through the hospital, her breath steady but quick with anticipation. She smiled at me between contractions, and I knew that this was the moment we had been waiting for. Hours later, when the baby finally arrived, I held my child in my arms for the first time. A tiny, perfect little human with the most precious eyes and the softest skin. And in that moment, I felt like the luckiest person in the world. It was a boy. We had decided on the name Noah, and as I looked down at his tiny face, I knew that everything had led to this moment. The pain, the heartbreak, the struggles. All of it had shaped me into the person I was now. And it was for this little one. For this family. Lila, exhausted but smiling, looked up at me with tears in her eyes. We did it, Jake. We did, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. We really did. And as I gazed at Noah, the boy who would grow up in this house, in this love, I realized that the past was finally where it belonged. In the past. What mattered now was the future we were creating, the family we were building, and the life we would share. Together. And I couldn't wait to see where that future would take us. As the weeks turned into months, our life as a new family settled into an unspoken rhythm. The sleepless nights, the constant stream of baby bottles and diaper changes. It was all a blur of exhaustion, joy, and wonder. Noah grew quickly, his tiny hands wrapping around my finger with a grip that felt impossibly strong. His smile was a bright light in our world, and every laugh, every new milestone, made me feel like the luckiest man alive. Lila was, of course, an amazing mother. Watching her with Noah filled me with awe. How natural it seemed, how effortless. I was amazed by her patience and grace, even in the middle of a late-night feeding or when the house was a mess and the laundry piled high. And even though it wasn't always easy, we had a team mentality. We supported each other. We didn't have to speak to know when the other needed a break or when it was time to step up and take on a little extra. But as much as Noah was the center of our world, Lila and I both knew that, in the midst of all the change, we had to keep nurturing our relationship too. The quiet moments we shared, even if they were brief, helped us stay grounded in each other. Whether it was a cup of coffee together in the morning before Noah woke up or a quiet walk around the yard after dinner, we never lost sight of what had brought us together in the first place. One crisp autumn afternoon, Lila and I took Noah for a walk in the stroller, the golden leaves swirling around us as we strolled down the path. The air was cool, and Noah was bundled up in a soft, knitted blanket, his little face peeking out, eyes wide as he looked at the world around him. I can't believe how fast he's growing, Lila said, her voice a mixture of awe and bittersweetness as she watched Noah coo and giggle at the leaves floating by. I know, I said, pushing the stroller with one hand while the other held hers. It feels like just yesterday we were bringing him home, and now he's already getting so big. Lila smiled up at me. I was thinking, maybe we should start thinking about the next steps. I mean, I know we've talked about it before, but now that Noah's here, I feel like I want to keep building on everything we've started. What do you think? I turned to look at her, the weight of her words settling in. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about Noah, about what kind of life we wanted to provide for him and what kind of legacy we wanted to leave. I think you're right, I said slowly, my mind working through the possibilities. We've built a good foundation, but there's always more to do, more to give, more to share. She stopped walking for a moment, her eyes meeting mine. I was thinking maybe we could think about expanding the business. You know, the design and furnishing idea you had? We could offer more services, maybe even start designing for other families who want to build their own dream spaces. I think it's a way we could give back to our community too. I was stunned by the idea. It was the first time Lila had really expressed an interest in working alongside me on something like this, and I could see the excitement in her eyes. It was a vision I had, but one I had never shared with her in such detail. That's actually brilliant, I said, grinning at her. I've always wanted to do more with the business, and now feels like the perfect time. We've got Noah, we've got the house, and I think we can do something great together. Lila's eyes sparkled. We could even make it family-oriented, offer design services for families who are just starting out. It would be the perfect way to use our story, our experiences, and give back in a way that feels meaningful. Her words struck me like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, I could see everything. The business wasn't just about furniture and homes. It was about helping people create spaces where they could build memories, where their families could grow, just like ours. It was about making sure that the dreams we had for our family, the love we had for each other, could extend beyond just us. We're going to need a bigger space, I said, thinking ahead. And we'll have to hire a team. But we can start small, with the community we already know. Lila nodded. And we'll do it together, just like everything else. And just like that, our dream of growing our family took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't just about Noah anymore. It was about building something that would sustain our family for years to come. Something that we could be proud of. Something that would help others. We were ready for this new adventure. That night, as Noah slept peacefully in his crib, Lila and I sat on the couch, a warm fire crackling in the fireplace. The room felt cozy and full of love, and I looked over at Lila, my heart full. You know, I said softly, when I was standing at that altar all those years ago, I never would have imagined this life. I never would have imagined you and me, Noah, and a business we could build together. Lila smiled, her eyes soft and content. I think that's the beauty of it all, Jake. The way life surprises us, how things turn out when we least expect it. I leaned in and kissed her forehead. I'm so glad you're here with me. I'm so glad it's us. Her hand rested gently on mine and she nodded, her voice full of certainty. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And as we sat there, the fire flickering in front of us, I knew that the next chapter of our story had just begun. It was a chapter we would write together, one filled with love, growth, and the kind of happiness that only comes when you've built something real. Something lasting. Years passed, and life seemed to stretch out before us, beautiful and unpredictable, just as we had always hoped. Noah grew from a curious toddler into a lively, bright-eyed child with an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. He asked questions about everything, from the stars in the sky to the way trees grew, and Lila and I found ourselves constantly amazed by his curiosity. Our business, the design company we had envisioned, grew steadily. It wasn't always easy. There were late nights, long meetings, and the occasional setback. But it was fulfilling. We took on more clients, and the word spread quickly. Our specialty was creating homes that didn't just look good, but felt like they were meant for the people living in them. Each project became a reflection of our belief that a home should tell a story, that it should be a space where memories were made, where laughter echoed, and where love could grow. We expanded our team, bringing in people who shared our vision, and the business began to take on a life of its own. Lila worked tirelessly with clients, and I took on the logistical side of things. We complemented each other perfectly, just as we had always done. Every new project was a new adventure, and every new home felt like we were adding to the tapestry of our community. But no matter how busy we became, we always made time for Noah. Even with the challenges of running a business and managing a growing family, we never lost sight of what truly mattered: the time we spent together. Whether it was weekend trips to the beach, movie nights in the living room, or quiet moments at the dinner table, those were the moments that kept us grounded. One evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing some design plans for a new project, Noah came running in, a bright smile plastered on his face. "Dad, Mom, guess what?" he said, bouncing on his heels. Lila looked up from the cookbook she was flipping through. "What's up, buddy?" Noah's grin only grew wider. "I made a new friend today at school. His name's Ben, and he's super cool. And we were talking about how cool it would be to build our own treehouse." I chuckled at his excitement. "A treehouse, huh? That sounds like a big project. What's your plan for it?" He leaned over the table, whispering as if it were a top-secret idea. "Well, I was thinking we could make it really big, like a clubhouse. And we can have a slide and a rope ladder and maybe even a secret door. What do you think, Dad?" Lila and I exchanged amused glances. The idea of a treehouse wasn't new. Noah had talked about it on and off for months. But the fire in his eyes now was different. This was the kind of project that would take time, thought, and effort. "You know what?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "I think that sounds like a fantastic idea. But you and I are going to have to plan it out first. Maybe draw up some designs?" Noah's eyes lit up. "You mean I can help design it, just like you design houses for other people?" "Exactly," I said, smiling. "We'll need a solid blueprint and maybe even a few materials from the hardware store. But we'll do it together, you and me." That night, after Noah had gone to bed, Lila and I sat together on the couch. The glow from the fireplace flickered across the room as we shared a quiet moment. She rested her head on my shoulder, her hand holding mine. "You know, Jake, I'm really proud of how far we've come. The business, Noah, everything. It feels like we've created this perfect little world for ourselves." I kissed her forehead gently. I couldn't agree more. But what makes it perfect isn't just the business or the house. It's us. It's the life we've built together. Lila smiled softly, her eyes meeting mine. "And it keeps getting better. With every step, every project, and now Noah's treehouse. I can't wait to see what comes next." I chuckled. "Well, I'm pretty sure the treehouse is going to be our next big adventure. But who knows what else life has in store for us." As I looked at Lila, I realized how much we had transformed over the years. We had started out with nothing but love and dreams. And now, we had everything. A family, a business, a home filled with memories and laughter. I thought back to that day when I had stood at the altar, heartbroken and confused, unsure of where my life was heading. I never could have imagined this life. This beautiful, imperfect, and incredibly fulfilling life. The next few weeks flew by. Noah and I spent our weekends planning the treehouse, designing it together, and picking out materials. It was a labor of love, and every day Noah would come home from school, eager to show me new ideas and revisions to his plans. Then, one bright Saturday morning, we got to work. With Lila's encouragement, we all spent the day in the backyard, building the foundation and framing the treehouse. Noah was at the center of it all, directing traffic with a confidence that surprised me. With each beam we put in place, with each board we nailed, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. Not just for the treehouse, but for what it represented. It was a symbol of our growth, of how far we had come, and how we continued to build this beautiful life together. By the time we finished, months later, the treehouse was a masterpiece. A spacious, multi-level structure with windows that overlooked the entire backyard, a rope ladder hanging down from the side, and a secret trapdoor that Noah insisted was the perfect way to enter. It was everything he had imagined. And more. On the day we finished, we all stood back, taking it in. Noah climbed up the rope ladder, his face glowing with pride. I stood beside Lila, and for a moment, we just looked at him. He was so full of life, so full of dreams. And I realized that all of it, every ounce of effort, was worth it. "This is the best treehouse ever," Noah shouted from above, his voice echoing through the yard. And in that moment, with the sun setting behind us, Lila and I shared a quiet smile. Life had never been perfect, but it was ours. And as long as we had each other, it was all that we ever needed. Years went by, and our little world continued to expand, stretching into new projects, new milestones, and new challenges. The treehouse became more than just a structure in the backyard. It was a symbol of the life we had built, a life we had worked so hard to create, brick by brick, moment by moment. But even in a life that seemed perfect, sometimes the universe had a way of shaking things up. It started with a phone call late one evening, one I never could have anticipated. Lila and I were curled up on the couch, Noah asleep upstairs, and the warmth of the fire crackling in the background. I was half distracted, scrolling through the business emails, when my phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. I answered it casually, expecting nothing more than a telemarketer or an automated message. "Jake," a voice said, deep and familiar, but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "It's Isabella." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. The past, the life I had walked away from, came rushing back in an instant. It had been years since I had spoken to her, since that fateful day she had left me standing at the altar, shattering everything we had built. My heart sank into my stomach, the warmth of the fire feeling like it was suddenly miles away. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady but the tension thick in the air. "I know this is unexpected, Jake, but I need to talk to you. It's important." I glanced at Lila, who noticed the change in my demeanor immediately. She gave me a questioning look, and I mouthed, "Isabella." Lila's expression darkened, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded slowly, silently acknowledging the weight of the moment. "Jake?" Isabella's voice cut through the silence again. I'm sick. It's bad, and the doctors say I don't have much time left. I've been trying to get in touch with you for a while now, but I know you have your life, your family. I understand if you don't want to hear from me, but I'm reaching out because I need to make peace with the past, with you." The world seemed to tilt. I couldn't breathe. For so long, Isabella had been a ghost in the corner of my mind. Someone who had left, someone who had torn my life apart. But hearing her now, vulnerable, broken, was something I hadn't prepared for. I stood up from the couch, pacing the room as her words echoed in my head. "How long?" I finally managed to ask, the words scraping out of my throat. "A few months. It's been too long. But Jake, I need to hear that you're okay, that you're happy. I need to hear it from you before it's too late." A heavy silence fell between us, one I couldn't escape. I didn't know what to say. The anger, the resentment, the questions that had haunted me for so long. Could I really just let them go? Could I find a way to forgive her? To accept the past for what it was? I looked over at Lila, her face pale, the lines of worry etched deep. She had always known about Isabella, about the pain I carried, but she also knew that I had moved on. We had moved on. This life we had built together, our family, had been everything. And yet here I was, confronted with the woman who had shattered me, asking for forgiveness. Lila stood up, walking toward me, her presence strong and unwavering. "Jake," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside of her. "I know this is hard. I know it's unexpected, but you don't owe her anything. You owe yourself peace." I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. I turned my attention back to the phone, hearing Isabella's faint breathing on the other end. "Isabella," I said, my voice calm but carrying the years of pain. "You hurt me. You left me. You changed my life in ways I'm still trying to understand. But I've built something real, with Lila, with Noah. I don't know if I can offer you what you're asking for, but I'm not the person I was back then." There was a long pause on the line. I could feel the shift, the resignation in her silence. "I understand, Jake. I'm sorry, I truly am. I just needed to know you were okay." The call ended, and I stood there in the quiet, the weight of it all hanging between us like a thick fog. Isabella was gone again, this time for good. And though her words had lingered in my mind, I knew I had no more room for the ghosts of the past. My future was here, with Lila and Noah, and that was the life I had fought for. Lila stepped forward and pulled me into her arms, holding me tight, as if to remind me of where I belonged. "I'm here, Jake," she whispered. "You're not alone in this." And in that moment, I realized the truth. I had spent so many years trying to fix something that was broken, but what I had now, this family, this love, was what truly mattered. The rest was just noise. The past was behind me. The future was ours. And as I held Lila in my arms, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against mine, I knew that no matter what came next, I was finally home. The end had passed. And the beginning? That was only just starting. I secretly recorded my cheating partner and exposed them online. I never thought I would be the kind of person who would resort to such extreme measures. But life, as I had come to learn, had a way of forcing your hand. My name's Ella, and what I'm about to tell you is not easy to admit, but it's the truth. I'd been dating Chris for almost 2 years. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. We went on vacations together, posted cute selfies on social media, and had our favorite spots in the city. He was charming, good-looking, and had a way of making everything seem effortless. People envied what we had. I envied what we had. Or I thought I did. There were always little things, unexplained absences, late nights at work, and the occasional slip-up in his stories. But I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? I loved him. And that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them, right? But that trust started to fray when I began noticing changes in him. He was more distant, and there were nights when he'd just be too tired for anything. I wasn't blind. Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The tipping point came one Friday night when I had planned a surprise dinner for us. I had been preparing for days. I wanted to show him how much I cared, how much I appreciated him. When I arrived at our apartment, there was no sign of Chris. His shoes were neatly placed by the door. His jacket still hung in the hallway, but he was nowhere to be found. I texted him, expecting a quick reply, but nothing. I called, and it went straight to voicemail. I waited for a while before deciding to check his car. It was parked outside. Odd, because he always parked in the garage when he came home late. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A pair of unfamiliar shoes were lying on the floor of the hallway near the front door. Not just any shoes. These were the kind of shoes a woman might wear to impress someone. My mind raced. I opened the door to his bedroom, hoping to find some kind of explanation. What I found instead was Chris, in bed with someone else. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no mistaking it. He was with her, and they weren't just talking. The scene was unmistakably intimate. She looked up and saw me first. Her eyes widened, but it was Chris's reaction that hit me like a punch to the gut. He didn't apologize, didn't even look guilty. Instead, he stared at me blankly, as if he hadn't been caught in the most obvious way possible. "Ella, I can explain," he stammered, scrambling to cover himself. But there was no explanation that could make sense of what I was seeing. He was supposed to be my partner, my best friend. And here he was, tangled up in a lie, breaking the one thing that had kept us together for so long. I turned on my heel and walked out of the apartment without another word. I didn't cry. Not then. I felt numb, almost as if my body couldn't process the betrayal. But as I sat in my car, staring at the headlights of other cars driving by, something inside me snapped. I'd been humiliated. And I knew I couldn't just let this go. Not when he thought he could get away with it. Not when he thought I was some fool who didn't deserve the truth. So I did what anyone would do in the age of social media. I pulled out my phone. At first, I wasn't sure what to do. I could have blocked him, walked away, tried to forget. But I didn't want to forget. I wanted him to remember this. I wanted the world to see who he really was. I knew I couldn't just expose him for the cheating jerk he was to his friends or to our mutual acquaintances. They'd just take his side, make excuses, or worse, pretend it never happened. But online? That was different. I set up a private account on a platform I knew he used regularly. It took only minutes to gather the evidence. I had it all. The video footage from our front door camera, his messages to her, even pictures of their private moments from his phone, which, yes, I accessed while he was at work one day. It was all there. Irrefutable. With trembling hands, I uploaded everything. The caption I wrote wasn't dramatic. I didn't need to add any theatrics to make my point clear. This is what betrayal looks like. To the man I thought I knew. I hit post. And just like that, I let the world see who Chris really was. The relief I felt was almost instantaneous, though I wasn't sure whether it was the satisfaction of exposing him or the release from the weight of the secret I had been holding on to for so long. Either way, I wasn't done yet. The worst part of all of this hadn't even happened yet, but for now I had done what I needed to do. The next few hours felt like an eternity. I sat in my car outside my apartment, staring at the screen of my phone, watching the views and comments flood in. It was surreal. I hadn't expected it to blow up this quickly. The notifications came in so fast that I had to turn off the sound. My post had gone viral. People I didn't even know were sharing it, commenting on it, tagging their friends. It was overwhelming, and yet, it was oddly empowering. I'd taken back control of the situation, something I thought I'd lost when I found Chris with another woman. The first message I got was from my best friend, Lauren. "Ella, what the hell is going on? Is this real?" I didn't even bother responding with words. I just sent her the link to the post. The next thing I knew, she was calling me. I picked up immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I will be," I replied, trying to steady my breathing. "But Chris, he's gone too far. I had to do this. I had to show everyone who he really is." Lauren was silent for a moment, processing everything. "You've been through a lot with him. I know you loved him, but Ella, you deserve better than this. You know that, right?" "I do now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, everything about him was a lie. I can't believe I never saw it." She sighed. "You couldn't have known. He was careful. But now? Now you've got nothing to lose." I nodded, although she couldn't see me. "I want him to feel the consequences. I want him to feel how I felt. I want him to know that what he did isn't just going to go away." Lauren was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Just be careful, okay? People can be really cruel online, and once it's out there, there's no taking it back." She wasn't wrong, but the thought of him walking away unscathed after everything he'd put me through, it felt impossible. The next few hours were a blur of messages. Most of them were from people I barely knew. Some were supportive, others were judgmental. Some called me brave, while others told me I was going too far. But the ones that hurt the most came from Chris's friends and family. "Ella, what the hell is this?" Chris's best friend, Mark, messaged me. "You're making a huge mistake. This will ruin him. I didn't respond to him. I didn't need to. Mark had always been in Chris's corner, and I wasn't about to explain myself to someone who clearly had no idea what it felt like to be betrayed. Then came the message I had been dreading. Chris. It came late that night, just as I was about to close my eyes. The screen lit up and my heart skipped a beat as I saw his name pop up on my notifications. His message was simple, but the weight of it hit me like a ton of bricks. We need to talk. This isn't what you think. My hands trembled as I typed back. What's there to talk about, Chris? I saw it with my own eyes. There was no response for a while. I stared at the screen, waiting for him to say something. Anything. The silence was maddening. Finally, after what felt like hours, his reply came through. I didn't mean for it to happen. You've got to believe me. I love you, Ella. I never wanted to hurt you. I almost laughed. Almost. But the anger I felt simmered beneath the surface, and it was too raw to ignore. You love me? Then why the hell were you in bed with someone else? Do you honestly think I'm that stupid? His response came quickly this time, almost too quickly. I made a mistake, a stupid mistake. But we can work through this. We can fix this. Just, let's talk. Please. I stared at the message, heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to yell at him, to tell him how much he'd hurt me, to remind him that he'd crossed a line I couldn't unsee. But a part of me was still holding on to the idea of him, the Chris I thought I knew, the one who was supposed to be loyal, kind, and trustworthy. But the truth was that Chris didn't exist anymore. I didn't reply. Instead, I went back to the post and watched the comments roll in. It wasn't long before I saw one that made me pause. It was a comment from a woman named Lucy. I've been seeing Chris for a few months now. He told me you were just a phase, that he wasn't happy. I had no idea he was still with you. I'm so sorry you had to find out like this. My breath caught in my throat. I read the comment over and over, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This wasn't just an affair. This was something much deeper. He'd been seeing her for months. And here I was, thinking I was the one who had been lied to. I suddenly felt a surge of anger, but it wasn't just at Chris anymore. It was at myself, too. How could I have been so blind? The next morning, I posted an update. To everyone who's been supporting me, thank you. To those who think this is just a mistake that can be fixed, you don't know what you're talking about. Chris has been lying to me for months. He's been seeing someone else, and he's not the person I thought he was. I'm done pretending. I hit post and immediately felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't going to keep his secrets anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone tell me I was overreacting or that I should give him another chance. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. But as I closed my phone and tried to get some rest, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The following days felt like a whirlwind. I couldn't escape the constant notifications from my phone. Every time I checked, there was something new. Messages, comments, and shares. It seemed like everyone had an opinion, but no one knew the full story. No one except me. Chris didn't try to contact me again after that final message. He must have realized I wasn't going to give him a chance to explain himself. His silence spoke volumes, but as much as I wanted to believe it was over, there was a part of me that wasn't ready for the fallout. I'd exposed his lie, but I wasn't prepared for what would come next. I was at work when things really started to escalate. I had been quietly going about my day, trying to focus on my tasks, when Lauren texted me. Ella, are you okay? Check Twitter. I opened the app, and there it was, Chris's response. He'd posted a video. I pressed play, and my stomach twisted as I watched his face appear on screen. His hair was messy, his eyes bloodshot, and his voice, though calm, sounded like it was shaking just beneath the surface. He looked like a man who had been caught in his own lies and was trying to salvage whatever he could. I know people have seen what Ella posted. He began, his voice low and regretful. And I know I messed up. I made a huge mistake, but I'm asking for forgiveness. The truth is, yes, I was seeing someone else, but it wasn't what you think. Ella and I had been struggling for months. We'd grown apart. I didn't feel loved anymore. I wasn't happy. And I made a terrible decision. A decision I will regret for the rest of my life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was trying to make it sound like I had driven him to cheat, like I was the one who'd failed him, and that his betrayal was somehow justified. Ella, if you see this, please know I never meant to hurt you. I was wrong. But I still love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Please give me a chance to explain in person. I sat there, stunned. Was this really happening? Was he trying to spin this around on me? It didn't matter that he was sorry now. He'd already broken everything we had. My phone buzzed again, and I saw more messages flooding in. People who had seen the video were taking sides. His friends were calling me vindictive and petty. They said I was destroying his life, and that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. Some even accused me of trying to ruin his reputation out of jealousy. My blood boiled. I wasn't the one who had lied to everyone. I wasn't the one who had broken promises. And yet, somehow I was the villain in their eyes. It hurt more than I could put into words. But I wasn't going to let them twist the truth. I wasn't going to sit back and let them shame me into silence. I posted a response. It's cute that he's trying to make this about his feelings. But here's the truth. Chris lied. He lied to me. He lied to everyone. He was seeing someone else behind my back for months. You can try to spin it however you want, but the reality is that he never respected me enough to be honest with me. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about moving on from someone who never had my best interest at heart. As soon as I posted it, I knew the storm was about to get worse. And it did. Chris's video was everywhere now. People were screenshotting his words, quoting him, and circulating it among their friends. My inbox was flooded with hateful messages. People I'd known for years were turning on me, calling me a liar, saying I was out to destroy him. But there were also people, strangers mostly, who sent me messages of support. Some told me they'd been through something similar. Others just told me they admired my strength. One message stood out in particular. I'm so sorry you're going through this. I went through something similar with my ex. He tried to make me look like the bad guy too. But trust me, the truth always comes out in the end. That message gave me the strength I needed to keep going. I knew I wasn't the only one who had been hurt. I wasn't the only one who had trusted someone who turned out to be someone else entirely. It was late that evening when Chris finally showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting it, but I wasn't exactly surprised either. His knock was tentative, unsure. The same knock he'd always used when he was trying to convince me of something. Of anything, really. I opened the door, and there he was, standing in front of me. He looked different somehow. Smaller, like the weight of everything was finally catching up to him. He wasn't the confident, charming Chris I had fallen for. Now, he was just a man who had betrayed the person who had loved him unconditionally. Ella? His voice was strained. Can we talk? I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let him into the living room. I wasn't going to make it easy for him, but I was done pretending like I didn't care. He sat down on the couch and I stood in front of him, arms crossed. I don't know what to say, he began. I messed up, I know I did. But this isn't who I am, Ella. I never wanted to hurt you. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because you've been hurting me for months. This is who you are, Chris. The man I loved? He doesn't exist anymore. You made your choice. I didn't want to lose you, he said, his eyes pleading. I thought if I could just keep everything under control, we could fix it later. But I was wrong. I should have been honest with you. I shook my head, disappointed. It's too late for honesty now. He stood up, taking a step closer. Please don't do this. Don't shut me out. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I felt the tears welling up, but I pushed them back. I'm done, Chris. I don't need your apology. I need you to leave. This, us, it's over. He didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me further. He just stood there for a moment, defeated, before turning and walking out the door. As I watched him leave, a strange sense of finality washed over me. It was over. And despite everything, I was going to be okay. The days after Chris left felt like both a relief and a weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had space to breathe. The noise of the internet, the overwhelming flood of opinions, and the constant messages started to die down. The world had moved on, at least for the most part. But I hadn't. I was still carrying the emotional scars from the last few weeks. I spent the next couple of days in quiet reflection, focusing on myself. I took long walks around the city, stopped by my favorite coffee shops, and began to rediscover the parts of me I'd lost while I was caught up in Chris's world. But even though the storm had calmed, there was something gnawing at me. Something I couldn't ignore. Chris's friends, his family, they weren't going to just let this go. His image, the one he had so carefully crafted, was shattered. And they were angry. I knew they were. But what I didn't expect was for it to escalate the way it did. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I got a call from Lauren. Her voice was urgent, her words tumbling over each other. Ella, you need to check your email. Now. Lauren, what is it? I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. I don't know how to explain it. Just check it. I opened my inbox and there it was. A series of threatening emails, all from different addresses, but they all had one thing in common. They were filled with venomous, hateful words. Most of them were vague, just angry rants accusing me of ruining Chris's life. But one email stood out above the rest. It had a subject line that made my blood run cold. You'll regret this. I clicked on it, and the message inside was simple but chilling. You think you're winning. You think you've exposed the truth. But you have no idea what you've started. Chris is not the only one who can hurt you. We'll make sure your life is destroyed, just like you've tried to destroy his. I read the message over and over, my mind spinning. It was a threat, no question about it. But who was behind it? Was it one of Chris's friends? One of his family members? I had no way of knowing for sure. Lauren's voice broke through my thoughts again. Ella, you okay? Did you see the email? I saw it, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But who would do this? Why would they threaten me like this? I don't know, she said quietly, but I don't like it. Be careful. You have no idea how far these people are willing to go to protect Chris. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. A part of me wanted to go to the police, but I knew it wouldn't do much. No one could prove anything. All I had were the emails, and they could be written by anyone. Still, the fear gnawed at me. What if they actually followed through on their threats? I decided to be smart. I changed all of my passwords, tightened my privacy settings on social media, and made sure that I had extra security on my phone and email accounts. I even asked Lauren to stay over that night, just in case. The next few days were tense. I stayed alert, constantly checking my surroundings whenever I left my apartment. It felt paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It wasn't just the threats in the email. It was the sense of unease that followed me everywhere I went. The feeling that the quiet was only the calm before the storm. And then it happened. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw the first sign of something truly sinister. I was at the grocery store picking up some things for dinner when I heard the familiar sound of someone calling my name. Ella. I turned, my heart racing. It was Chris's sister, Amy. She had always been sweet to me, always supportive of our relationship. But now, her face was twisted with anger. Her eyes, usually warm, were cold and accusing. You're making a mistake, she snapped as she approached me. You think you've won, but you've just made everything worse. You've ruined our family. Amy, what are you talking about? I said, trying to remain calm. You don't get it, do you? Chris is a mess because of you. You've turned everyone against him. And now you're trying to destroy his career, his reputation. You'll regret this. I swear. Her words cut through me like a knife. I hadn't even considered the impact on his family, though I probably should have. But the way she said it, like I was the villain in all of this, made my stomach churn. Amy, I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. But Chris lied to me, and I deserve better than being treated like this. I don't owe him anything. She shook her head in disbelief, her hands clenched into fists. You don't understand. He's not perfect, okay? But he's our brother, and you've humiliated him in front of everyone. We won't forget what you did. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there in the aisle feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I stood there for a few moments, trying to collect myself, but the weight of her words kept pressing down on me. You've ruined our family. But the truth was, I hadn't ruined anything. Chris had ruined everything. He had made the choice to cheat, to lie, to betray my trust. I had only reacted. But as I stood there trying to make sense of what Amy had said, it hit me. Chris wasn't just the one who had betrayed me. His family had been complicit in the lie, too. They had turned a blind eye to his behavior, defended him when I had questions, and now they were turning against me, too. It wasn't just Chris who needed to be exposed. It was everyone who had covered for him, everyone who had helped him keep his secrets. I wasn't done yet. I was going to make sure that the whole world knew exactly who Chris and his family really were. If they thought they could scare me into backing down, they were wrong. I had nothing to lose anymore. The days following my encounter with Amy were some of the most intense of my life. I couldn't shake the feeling that the tension around me was only growing. I was no longer just dealing with a cheater. I was dealing with an entire family that had shielded him, protected him, and now they were coming after me. Amy's words echoed in my mind. You've ruined our family. But I couldn't help but feel like they had ruined themselves long before I came into the picture. They had all known about Chris's lies, his infidelities, and his deceit. I was the one who had been left in the dark. But the reality of the situation settled in when I found out something that made my blood run cold. It was a Wednesday morning when I received an unexpected email. This time, it wasn't from an anonymous source. It was from someone I recognized. Chris's mother. Ella, you don't know what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart. Chris made mistakes, but he's trying to fix them. We all make mistakes. Please stop this before it's too late. Don't make me take legal action against you. I stared at the message, barely able to process it. Legal action? I quickly scrolled down to the bottom of the email, where she had included a link to a lawyer's website. The threat was unmistakable. She was not just upset with me. She was trying to intimidate me into backing down. I took a deep breath, fighting back the wave of panic that threatened to overtake me. I wasn't going to let this family push me around. They thought that a legal threat would scare me, but it only made me more determined. I responded quickly, refusing to let them control the narrative. Your son made a choice. He cheated on me, and I found out. He lied to me for months, and I chose to expose the truth. If your family feels uncomfortable with that, then maybe they should take a hard look at his actions, not mine. I'm not backing down. Not now, not ever. I hit send, my heart pounding. I knew there was a risk involved in standing my ground, but I had come too far to let them manipulate me into silence. The following days felt like a constant game of cat and mouse. Chris's family wasn't letting up, and neither was I. Every time I checked my email or social media, I found more hateful messages, more threats. They even started reaching out to mutual friends, trying to get them to convince me to remove my post and move on. But I wasn't going to be silenced. Not now. Not ever. Then, on a Friday night, something unexpected happened. I was sitting on my couch scrolling through my phone when I saw a notification pop up. Chris had posted again. I clicked on it immediately, and my heart skipped a beat. It was another video, But this time, it was different. His face looked more desperate, more raw than I'd ever seen it before. He wasn't hiding behind a polished persona anymore. This was a man who had lost control. "Ella," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've betrayed you. But I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make things right. I'm begging you to give me the opportunity to prove that I can change." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. They sounded so sincere, so full of regret, but I couldn't forget everything he had done to me. I couldn't ignore the pain that had been building for months, the trust that had been shattered in an instant. "You think I'm the villain in this story?" Chris continued. "But I swear to you, I was never trying to hurt you. I was just lost. Please don't let this be the end of us. Please." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the screen. I could feel the familiar tug in my chest, the part of me that still cared for him, that still wanted to believe in the man he used to be. But the other part of me, the stronger part, was telling me to walk away, to move on from someone who had proven time and time again that he wasn't worth my love. Before I could even process my thoughts, another notification appeared. This time it was from Lucy, the woman Chris had been seeing behind my back. "Ella," the message began. "I don't know how to explain this, but I feel awful. Chris told me you two were over, that he hadn't been happy for a long time. But I see now that everything he told me was a lie. I had no idea about you or what was going on between you two. I'm so sorry. I didn't know you existed." I stared at the message, my stomach dropping. How could Chris do this to me? Not only had he cheated on me, but he had lied to this woman too. He had convinced her that I was just a past chapter, that I wasn't a part of his present. He had manipulated her just like he had manipulated me. I felt a strange sense of powerlessness at first, but then I realized something. It wasn't just my story. It wasn't just Chris who needed to be held accountable. Lucy deserved to know the truth too. I responded to her immediately. "Thank you for reaching out. I don't blame you for what happened. Chris deceived both of us. I just want you to know that everything he told you was a lie. You deserve better than that." The next morning, I woke up to see that Chris had posted yet another video, this time apologizing to Lucy as well. He seemed desperate to repair everything, but it was too little, too late. He had already exposed his true nature. The lies, the cheating, the manipulation, it was all out in the open now. I didn't need him to beg me for forgiveness. I didn't need him to apologize to me or anyone else. What I needed was closure, and I was getting it. As I sat there, reading the comments flooding in, I realized something. This was no longer just about Chris. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my future. I had taken control of the narrative, and no one, not even Chris, could take that away from me. I was done being a victim. I was done being afraid. I had exposed the truth. And now, it was time to move on. The silence that followed Chris's final desperate video was almost deafening. For days, it felt like the entire world had held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And then, nothing. The storm had passed. I sat on my couch one evening, looking out the window as the soft golden light of the setting sun painted everything in warm hues. It was strange how life felt so normal again after everything that had happened. The social media buzz had slowed to a crawl, and the message notifications had mostly stopped. Some people reached out in support, while others remained silent, unsure of what to say. But the most important thing? I felt like I had finally regained control. As the days went on, I took time for myself. I focused on healing, processing everything I'd been through, and surrounding myself with people who actually cared about me. Lauren was a rock during all of this. She checked in with me daily, brought over takeout when I didn't feel like cooking, and just let me vent when I needed to. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like I could move forward. I kept thinking about Chris. Was I angry? Yes. Was I hurt? Absolutely. But I was also starting to feel something else, something deeper. I felt a sense of gratitude for what had happened, even if it had been painful. I had learned so much about myself in the process. I learned how strong I truly was, how much I was willing to fight for my happiness, and how important it was to trust my instincts. A few weeks after Chris's final video, I received a message from Lucy. "Ella, I just wanted to thank you for being kind to me. I know it wasn't easy, but I appreciate that you reached out. I had no idea about you. Chris made me believe all these lies, and it hurts knowing I was a part of that." The message didn't sting anymore. In fact, it felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had been hurt by Chris's lies. Lucy had been just as manipulated as I had been. I responded quickly. "You don't owe me anything, Lucy. Chris is the one who needs to answer for everything. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." She responded with a heartfelt thank you, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. There was no more anger, no more resentment. Just a quiet understanding that sometimes the most painful lessons can lead to the most beautiful growth. But life had a way of throwing curveballs. As much as I had moved on, there was still one more thing that I needed to deal with: the fallout from Chris's family. I hadn't heard from them in a while, and I thought maybe they had finally accepted the reality of the situation. But one afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, a little wary. "Ella?" It was Amy. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I know we've had our differences, but I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her to go away, to leave me out of this mess. But there was another part of me, one that wanted closure, wanted to understand how things had gone so wrong. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my apartment. When I arrived, Amy was already sitting at a table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed with red, like she hadn't been sleeping. As I sat down across from her, I couldn't help but notice how much smaller she seemed. The woman who had confronted me at the grocery store was gone. In her place was someone who looked like she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Ella," she began, her voice unsteady. "I know I've said some things, and I don't know how to make up for it. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I want to apologize. You didn't deserve any of this." I stared at her for a long moment, processing her words. "Why now? Why after everything?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I think I was just so angry and upset that I didn't want to see the truth. I defended Chris because he's my brother, but I realized that doesn't make what he did right. And I'm sorry for how I treated you. You didn't deserve the blame I put on you." I let out a breath, feeling the weight in my chest begin to ease. It wasn't an apology I had expected, but it was one I needed. Amy had been so wrapped up in protecting her family that she hadn't seen the hurt they were causing. But now she was taking responsibility for her actions. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "It means a lot to me." For a moment, we both just sat there in silence, letting the weight of the conversation settle. Finally, Amy spoke again. "I can't change what happened, Ella, but I want you to know I see you now. And I see the strength you have. You don't have to forgive me, but I hope you can move on. You deserve happiness." I smiled at her, the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. I am moving on. I already have. The meeting wasn't about forgiveness, and it wasn't about trying to repair the unrepairable. It was just about understanding, about both of us coming to terms with what had happened. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The chapter with Chris and his family was finally closing. And with that, I realized something else. I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and countless threats, but I had come out the other side, not as a victim, but as someone who had taken control of her own story. The truth had set me free. And now it was time to focus on the future. My future. The days after my meeting with Amy were peaceful, almost too peaceful. Life had started to feel normal again. I was moving forward, taking care of myself, and focusing on my career. But just as I thought the storm had passed, the calm was shattered by a single message that appeared in my inbox. It was from an unfamiliar email address, one I hadn't seen before. "You think it's over? You have no idea what you've started." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't recognize the name attached to the email, but something about it felt ominous, like a shadow waiting to pounce. I clicked open the message, my hands shaking. "You ruined my son's life. You exposed him to the world, and you think you've won. But you've forgotten something important. You're not the only one with power. You're not the only one who can destroy." The message sent a chill down my spine. The anger was palpable, the threats unmistakable. My mind raced. Who was this? What were they talking about? I quickly scrolled down to the end of the email. And then, my blood ran cold. There was an attachment. I clicked on it. It was a video. The screen flickered to life, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was a recording of me sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone, just like I had done countless times before. But the way the video was shot, it was taken from the window across from my apartment. My eyes widened in horror. They've been watching me. The video zoomed in on my face, showing me at my most vulnerable. The person behind the camera had been so close, so silent in their surveillance that I hadn't even realized. The screen flickered again, and suddenly I heard a voice. "You think you're safe now? You think your secrets are safe? We know where you are. We know what you've done, and now everyone will know what you are hiding." The camera pulled back, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. Someone tall, someone familiar. My heart dropped into my stomach. The figure stepped forward, and the camera focused on their face. It was Chris. Chris. I felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. He had been watching me. All this time. He had never really left. "Chris," I whispered aloud to no one, my voice trembling with disbelief. I had thought he was out of my life for good. But there he was, still pulling the strings, still lurking in the background like a dark shadow, waiting to strike. The video abruptly cut off. I was frozen, unable to move. The cold, suffocating fear gripped me as I stared at the screen, knowing that Chris wasn't done yet. He had made a choice. And that choice, his obsession with controlling everything, had led him down a path that would destroy both of us. I wasn't just dealing with someone who had cheated on me. I was dealing with someone who had a vendetta, a person who wouldn't rest until he had ruined everything in his path. But I wasn't going to let him win. As the minutes passed, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't fear anymore. It was rage. He thought he could control the narrative, that he could make me his victim again. But this time, I was the one with the power. I was the one who had the truth, the one who had fought to expose it. And I would not let him take that from me. I opened my phone, my fingers moving quickly across the screen. I pulled up the video file I had of Chris. His confession, the one that had started it all. The one I had hidden in the deepest folder of my phone, just in case. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I uploaded it. I posted it online, just like I had posted everything else. But this time, I didn't just expose his lies. I exposed his manipulation, his control. I exposed him for the monster he had become, for the man who refused to let go. I showed the world who he really was. Within minutes, the reactions flooded in. People were shocked, disgusted, heartbroken. And as I watched the comments pour in, the messages from strangers and even friends, I realized that I was finally, truly free. But even as the world watched, as the walls closed in on Chris, I knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. I had made my move, but Chris was unpredictable, dangerous. His obsession with me hadn't ended. He would come for me again, and I would have to be ready. I stood up, feeling a surge of strength. This was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about survival. And I had learned the hard way that sometimes the only way to truly be free was to fight like hell. The game had just shifted, and I was ready for whatever came next. My girlfriend's ex showed up at our wedding with a shocking confession. I stood at the altar, my hands clammy despite the cool autumn breeze drifting through the open-air venue. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Sarah, my soulmate, was about to walk down the aisle, and in just a few minutes we'd be bound together forever. Everything was perfect, until he showed up. The crowd stirred, whispers rising like a storm rolling in. I turned to see a man at the back of the seating area, dressed in a dark suit. He had this desperate, almost haunted look in his eyes. I knew who he was instantly. Jake, Sarah's ex. The same Jake she hadn't spoken to in years. The same Jake she told me she was completely over. Heart pounding, I shot a glance at my best man, Mark, who gave me a look that screamed, "Do you want me to handle this?" But before I could say anything, Jake stepped forward. "Sarah, wait!" His voice cut through the ceremony like a knife. Sarah, who had just stepped onto the aisle with her father, froze. The color drained from her face. The guests turned in their seats, murmuring. I clenched my jaw, barely restraining the anger bubbling inside me. What the hell was he doing here? The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, and Sarah's father gave her a questioning look. But before anyone could stop him, Jake walked straight to the front, locking eyes with Sarah. "I know I have no right to be here," he said, voice trembling. "But I couldn't let this happen without telling you the truth." I crossed my arms, every muscle in my body tensed. "What truth?" I demanded. Jake hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Sarah, I never cheated on you." My stomach twisted. That was the reason Sarah had given me for their breakup. She told me she caught him texting another woman late at night, that he was emotionally unfaithful, and that it broke her heart. She swore she could never trust him again. That was why she moved on. That was why we were here. Sarah's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. Jake exhaled sharply. "You were set up." A hushed silence fell over the guests. Sarah shook her head, confusion flickering across her face. "Set up? By who?" Jake hesitated, then dropped the bombshell. "By your mother." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. My own breath hitched. "What?" Sarah visibly swayed, and I reached for her, steadying her. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "Why would my mother—" "She hated me," Jake said, his voice pained. "She told me flat out that she didn't think I was good enough for you, that I didn't have the right job, the right connections. I didn't fit into the life she wanted for you, and when I wouldn't break up with you, she made sure you'd do it instead." Sarah looked like she was going to be sick. Jake pulled out his phone and held up the screen. "She paid a woman to send those messages to my phone. Look, I have the proof. I only found out a week ago, but I had to tell you before you married someone else under false pretenses." I swallowed hard, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. Was this real? Sarah's mother sat stiffly in the front row, her face pale but unreadable. Sarah turned to her, voice shaking. "Mom, tell me this isn't true." Her mother looked away, and that's when I knew. Sarah's face crumpled, tears filling her eyes. Oh my God. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This was our wedding day. And yet, it suddenly felt like everything we had built was cracking apart. She turned to me, eyes pleading. "Ethan, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I searched her face, my mind racing. Did this change anything? Did it matter? Did she still love Jake? Jake looked between us, his jaw tight. "I just had to tell you," he said quietly. "I'm not here to ruin your wedding. I just couldn't let you marry him thinking I was the villain." With that, he turned and walked away. The silence was deafening. Sarah's mother wouldn't even meet her gaze. And I stood there waiting for her to make a choice. Would she still say I do? Or had everything changed? Sarah stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. The weight of the revelation hung over us like a storm cloud, suffocating and inescapable. The guests sat in stunned silence, waiting, no, watching, to see what would happen next. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. My fiancé's ex had just revealed that everything we knew about their breakup was a lie, orchestrated by the woman sitting in the front row. Her mother. Sarah turned toward her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. You did this? Her mother finally looked up, her face composed but tight with something that looked like regret. I did what I had to do, she said stiffly. Sarah's breath hitched. Had to? You destroyed my relationship. You lied to me. Her mother sighed, shaking her head. Jake wasn't good enough for you, sweetheart. I knew you'd waste years on him, and he had nothing to offer you. Look at where you are now. Look at him. She gestured toward me. Ethan is stable, responsible. He's the kind of man who can give you a future. I did what was best for you. I flinched at that. The worst part? I could see Sarah's mother believed what she was saying. Sarah looked shattered. Her hands curled into fists, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. She turned to me next, and my stomach twisted at the desperation in her gaze. Ethan, say something. I swallowed, my mind spinning. I loved Sarah. I wanted to spend my life with her. But right now, I didn't know if I was just the safe option her mother had forced her into. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice tight. Sarah's face fell. A deep, uneasy silence followed. Then she did something I didn't expect. She stepped back, away from the altar, away from me. The breath caught in my throat. Sarah, I said, reaching for her, but she shook her head. I need a second. She turned to the officiant, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this. Not like this. The guests gasped. My stomach dropped. She wasn't saying she didn't love me. She wasn't saying she wanted Jake back. But she was saying she couldn't go through with the wedding. Not right now. Sarah turned to me again, her eyes pleading. Ethan, I love you. But this is huge. I need time to process it. My mouth went dry. The woman I was about to marry was calling off the wedding. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. So, should we, pause? A few people in the crowd laughed nervously, but no one spoke. Sarah turned to our guests. I'm so sorry, everyone. I didn't plan for this to happen. I clenched my fists. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that we could move past this, that we could fix it. But I also knew she was right. This wasn't just about me. It was about everything. Her mother's betrayal, the truth about her past, the possibility that if things had been different, maybe she and Jake would still be together. I exhaled sharply, looking at her. Do you still love him? Her breath hitched. I don't know. That was all I needed to hear. I nodded slowly, taking a step back. Then I think we both know what we need to do. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Ethan. And just like that, the wedding was over. The guests stood in awkward silence as I walked away, my heart shattering with every step. Sarah wasn't the only one who needed time. I did too. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the ending either of us expected. And I wasn't sure if this was goodbye, or just a pause in our story. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. I sat at an outdoor cafe, my fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring at nothing in particular. A year had passed since that disastrous wedding day. A year since Sarah and I had walked away from the altar, both of us shattered and uncertain. I won't lie, those first few months were rough. We tried to talk a few times, but every conversation was weighted down by too many unanswered questions. Eventually, we stopped reaching out. Sarah needed space, and I needed clarity. So I focused on myself. I traveled, spent more time with friends, poured my energy into work. I had to figure out who I was without Sarah. I thought I'd moved on. I really did. Until today. Because today, Sarah was sitting across the cafe from me, unaware that I was here. She looked different. Lighter. Happier. Her hair was longer, and she wore a simple white sundress, her fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the table as she read something on her phone. I hesitated. Should I say something? Walk away? Before I could decide, she looked up. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she smiled. And just like that, everything came rushing back. I took a deep breath, stood, and walked over to her table. Hey, stranger. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. Then a quiet laugh. Hey! I gestured to the empty chair. Mind if I sit? She nodded, her gaze searching mine. Please. As I sat down, an old familiar warmth settled between us. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. My fiancé's ex had just revealed that everything we knew about their breakup was a lie, orchestrated by the woman sitting in the front row. Her mother. Sarah turned toward her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. You did this? Her mother finally looked up, her face composed but tight with something that looked like regret. I did what I had to do, she said stiffly. Sarah's breath hitched. Had to? You destroyed my relationship. You lied to me. Her mother sighed, shaking her head. Jake wasn't good enough for you, sweetheart. I knew you'd waste years on him, and he had nothing to offer you. Look at where you are now. Look at him. She gestured toward me. Ethan is stable, responsible. He's the kind of man who can give you a future. I did what was best for you. I flinched at that. The worst part? I could see Sarah's mother believed what she was saying. Sarah looked shattered. Her hands curled into fists, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. She turned to me next, and my stomach twisted at the desperation in her gaze. Ethan, say something. I swallowed, my mind spinning. I loved Sarah. I wanted to spend my life with her. But right now, I didn't know if I was just the safe option her mother had forced her into. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice tight. Sarah's face fell. A deep, uneasy silence followed. Then she did something I didn't expect. She stepped back, away from the altar, away from me. The breath caught in my throat. Sarah, I said, reaching for her, but she shook her head. I need a second. She turned to the officiant, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this. Not like this. The guests gasped. My stomach dropped. She wasn't saying she didn't love me. She wasn't saying she wanted Jake back. But she was saying she couldn't go through with the wedding. Not right now. Sarah turned to me again, her eyes pleading. Ethan, I love you. But this is huge. I need time to process it. My mouth went dry. The woman I was about to marry was calling off the wedding. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. So, should we, pause? A few people in the crowd laughed nervously, but no one spoke. Sarah turned to our guests. I'm so sorry, everyone. I didn't plan for this to happen. I clenched my fists. I wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that we could move past this, that we could fix it. But I also knew she was right. This wasn't just about me. It was about everything. Her mother's betrayal, the truth about her past, the possibility that if things had been different, maybe she and Jake would still be together. I exhaled sharply, looking at her. Do you still love him? Her breath hitched. I don't know. That was all I needed to hear. I nodded slowly, taking a step back. Then I think we both know what we need to do. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Ethan. And just like that, the wedding was over. The guests stood in awkward silence as I walked away, my heart shattering with every step. Sarah wasn't the only one who needed time. I did too. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the ending either of us expected. And I wasn't sure if this was goodbye, or just a pause in our story. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. I sat at an outdoor cafe, my fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee, staring at nothing in particular. A year had passed since that disastrous wedding day. A year since Sarah and I had walked away from the altar, both of us shattered and uncertain. I won't lie, those first few months were rough. We tried to talk a few times, but every conversation was weighted down by too many unanswered questions. Eventually, we stopped reaching out. Sarah needed space, and I needed clarity. So I focused on myself. I traveled, spent more time with friends, poured my energy into work. I had to figure out who I was without Sarah. I thought I'd moved on. I really did. Until today. Because today, Sarah was sitting across the cafe from me, unaware that I was here. She looked different, lighter, happier. Her hair was longer, and she wore a simple white sundress, her fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the table as she read something on her phone. I hesitated. Should I say something? Walk away? Before I could decide, she looked up. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she smiled. And just like that, everything came rushing back. I took a deep breath, stood, and walked over to her table. Hey, stranger. Her lips parted slightly in surprise. Then a quiet laugh. Hey. I gestured to the empty chair. Mind if I sit? She nodded, her gaze searching mine. Please. As I sat down, an old familiar warmth settled between us. I didn't expect to see you here, she admitted, stirring her drink. Yeah, me neither, I said honestly. But maybe it's fate. She smiled, a little wistful. Maybe. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our past lingering between us. Then she sighed. Ethan, I want to say that I'm sorry. Not just for what happened at the wedding, but for everything. For not seeing the truth sooner. For hurting you. I studied her, my heart pounding. Do you regret it? Her eyes softened. I regret the pain it caused, but I don't regret taking the time to figure out who I am. I nodded, understanding completely. So, did you ever talk to Jake again? I asked, bracing myself. She shook her head. He was part of my past, and I realized that's where he needed to stay. That chapter is closed. I exhaled, relief washing over me. She hesitated. And you? Are you seeing anyone? I smirked. Nope, still single, still figuring things out. She laughed softly. Same. Another pause. A long, meaningful one. Finally, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. Ethan, would you ever consider starting over? I looked into her eyes, the same ones I fell in love with all those years ago. And I realized something. Despite everything, despite the pain, the unanswered questions, the time apart, I still loved her. I smiled, lacing my fingers with hers. Yeah, I murmured. I think I would. And just like that, our story began again. The following months were a blur of rebuilding. Neither of us rushed into anything, and that was exactly what we both needed. We started with simple things. Coffee dates, long walks in the park, quiet dinners where we'd talk, laugh, and slowly chip away at the walls we'd built between us. It was clear there was still a deep connection, but it wasn't the same as before. We weren't jumping back into a whirlwind romance. We were building something new, something stronger. At first, Sarah's mom stayed out of the picture, and I had to admit, part of me was relieved. Her betrayal weighed heavy on both of us, and it would take time to process everything that had happened. But gradually, Sarah began reaching out to her mom again. One chilly Saturday morning, Sarah and I sat in a cozy cafe, sipping lattes, when she looked up at me, her face serious. I want to see my mom. I think it's time. I raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I'm sure, she said, her voice firm but uncertain. I have a lot to say to her, but I want you to come with me. I nodded. I knew this wasn't going to be easy for her, or for me, but I respected her decision. Later that afternoon, we pulled up to her mom's house. The white walls of the home looked almost too pristine against the overcast sky. My chest tightened as Sarah opened the car door, but I didn't stop her. I was here to support her, no matter what. Her mom greeted us at the door, her eyes wary but unreadable. There was an awkward silence before she stepped aside, letting us in. I'm sorry, Mom, Sarah said quietly after we'd taken a seat. I don't know where to start. Her mom didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, staring at her hands in her lap before looking up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry too, honey. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I knew what was best for you, but I didn't. I hurt you, and I ruined your chance at happiness with someone who loved you. The tension in the room thickened, but Sarah's gaze softened. You did ruin it. You made me believe Jake was bad for me when he wasn't. You manipulated me, and I let you. Her mom nodded slowly, her voice breaking. I was scared. I saw what you had with him, and I didn't think he was good enough for you. But I was wrong. I see that now. There was a long pause, and then Sarah spoke again. I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I used to, but I want to try. For both of us. I watched them, my heart heavy. It was clear that this was going to be a slow, painful process. But it was also a start. Maybe not for a perfect relationship, but for something that could heal over time. After that meeting, things didn't magically get better. There were more difficult conversations, more moments of silence, and the occasional misunderstanding. But little by little, the walls came down. And more importantly, Sarah and I began to rebuild our relationship on a new foundation. One that was honest, raw, and filled with the understanding that love doesn't always come easy. We spent more time together, learning about each other again. We didn't rush, didn't try to force things back to how they were. Instead, we enjoyed the small moments, the quiet evenings at home, the laughter that would bubble up unexpectedly, the way she'd hold my hand like she didn't want to let go. One day, several months later, I found myself walking beside her through a park. The sun was setting, painting the sky with pinks and oranges. It was the same park where we had walked many times before, but it felt different now. We weren't just trying again. We were new, different, stronger. Ethan, she said, her voice soft. I know things are different now, and maybe that's for the best. I've learned so much in the last year. About myself. About you, about love. I smiled. Me too. She stopped walking and turned to face me. I think I'm ready to start over. For real this time. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Her eyes locked onto mine, her smile growing wider. I mean, I want us to really start over. No more secrets, no more doubts, just us. What do you say? I took a deep breath, taking her hands in mine. I say, I'm all in. And that was it. We'd rebuilt what we'd lost, not by going back to the past, but by moving forward together. Our love story had been complicated, messy, and full of obstacles. But it was also real. And it was ours. And this time, we were ready to write the next chapter. Together. We'd come a long way in the past year. Sarah and I had found our way back to each other, but we weren't the same people we had been before. We were stronger, more honest, and, perhaps most importantly, more in tune with what we both wanted. The storm of our past had passed, and now we could finally look ahead with hope. After that day in the park, everything felt different. Every moment together was like a chance to rediscover one another. But there was still one thing left that we hadn't fully addressed. The wedding. The one that had been interrupted. The day that had started with so much promise and ended in heartbreak. Sarah and I talked about it. A lot. I never wanted to walk away from you that day. She confessed one evening as we sat on the couch, our hands intertwined. I wanted you, Ethan. I was just lost. It was too much. Too fast. I nodded, understanding. I get it. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that day, about what happened. And I think maybe it wasn't just the wedding that we weren't ready for. It was everything we hadn't dealt with yet. Her eyes softened and she rested her head on my shoulder. I've spent so much of my life listening to everyone else, trying to make everyone happy, that I didn't really think about what would make me happy. I squeezed her hand. And now you're figuring it out. We both are. It was true. We were no longer trying to meet expectations. Our love had become something raw and real. A journey that was ours and ours alone. One afternoon, as we were out walking in the city, I stopped in front of a small jewelry store. The window displayed a set of engagement rings, each one more beautiful than the last. Without thinking, I took Sarah's hand and led her inside. The soft chime of the bell above the door announced our arrival. The saleswoman smiled warmly, and I felt Sarah's gaze shift to the rings on display. I glanced at her, a bit nervous, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that I had to ask the question that had been burning inside me for months. Sarah, I began, my voice steady but my heart racing. I know we've been through a lot. And maybe things aren't perfect, but I'm certain about one thing. I paused, looking deep into her eyes. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. She blinked, her lips parting as if she were caught off guard. Ethan, what are you saying? I'm asking you to marry me again, I said, taking a deep breath. Not because of some perfect wedding or because it's expected, but because I've realized that no matter what happens, you're the person I want to be with. Her face softened, tears brimming in her eyes. You really mean that? I do. The world around us seemed to fade away as Sarah's lips trembled into a smile. I can't believe you're asking me this after everything we've been through, but yes, Ethan. Yes. She threw her arms around me and I held her tight, feeling the weight of our past, present, and future collide in the most beautiful way. Planning the wedding this time felt different. We weren't rushing. We weren't trying to create some fairy tale. This time we were building something that reflected who we truly were, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who had supported us along the way. It was a quiet, intimate ceremony in the same venue where we'd almost gotten married a year before. This time, there was no interference, no drama, just the people who mattered most. My family, her mom included after much healing, and a handful of close friends who had been there through it all. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. As Sarah walked down the aisle, I felt like everything had come full circle. She was glowing, radiant, her smile wide and genuine. And I couldn't help but feel grateful for the journey that had brought us here. When it was time for our vows, I took her hands in mine and looked into her eyes. Sarah, I know we've had our challenges, but I wouldn't change any of it. Because those moments brought us to where we are now. Together. You've shown me what real love is, and I promise to always choose you. Through the good, the bad, and everything in between. She smiled through her tears, squeezing my hands. Ethan, I promise to always be honest with you. To never let fear or doubt stand in the way of us. I will love you through the hard times and the easy times, because you are my home. I couldn't hold back the tears either. We'd both come a long way. And standing there, surrounded by those we loved, I knew this was only the beginning of our forever. We kissed, and the cheers that followed felt like the culmination of everything we'd fought for. The honeymoon was simple. Just the two of us. A quiet cabin by the lake where we spent days hiking and nights talking, rediscovering each other in the most peaceful way possible. No distractions, no expectations. Just us. As we sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars, Sarah leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. You know, this feels perfect, she murmured, This is what I always wanted. A real life with you. I kissed the top of her head. This is just the beginning. We've got a lifetime of adventures ahead. She smiled, a slow, contented smile that made my heart swell. And I realized in that moment that no matter what challenges came our way, we had already won. We had each other, and that was enough. The first few months of married life felt like a dream. The honeymoon glow hadn't quite worn off, and Sarah and I spent our days basking in the calm of simply being together. But life, as always, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah and I decided to spend the day at a local art exhibit, something we'd both been looking forward to. It was one of those events that felt like an escape from the routine, an opportunity to spark creativity. As we walked through the gallery, admiring the abstract paintings and sculptures, I couldn't help but notice Sarah was unusually quiet. I glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "You okay?" She gave me a half smile, but her eyes seemed distant. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" She shrugged. "You know, everything. Life. Where we're headed." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. "Is something wrong, Sarah? You know you can talk to me." She paused, looking at a painting of two intertwined figures, the colors vibrant but chaotic. "I guess I'm just wondering if we're truly ready for everything that comes with this. You know, marriage, it's a lot. I think I've always been afraid of losing myself in it." My heart tightened. I reached out, taking her hand. "You don't have to lose yourself, Sarah. We're building this together. I'm not asking you to change or become something you're not. We're a team." She nodded, but the hesitation was still there. "It's just, I don't want to wake up one day and realize I've been trying to live up to some ideal of what I think we should be, instead of what we actually are." The weight of her words hung in the air, and I realized there was more to this than just a fleeting doubt. She wasn't just talking about us. She was talking about herself. "Do you feel like you've lost yourself?" I asked quietly, holding her gaze. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet, but I worry I could." We walked in silence for a few moments, the conversation lingering between us like a shadow. It wasn't the first time I'd seen Sarah wrestle with the idea of self-identity, but I didn't realize how deep it went. As we left the gallery, we were both quiet. I wanted to fix it, to reassure her, but part of me also understood that this wasn't something I could just solve. It was something we both had to figure out together. The following week, Sarah made an unexpected decision. She sat me down in our living room, her expression serious, and told me she was considering taking a break from her work as a designer to focus on something else, something she hadn't fully explored before. "I've been thinking about writing," she said, nervously twisting her fingers. "I've always loved it, but I've never given myself permission to do it. I've always been so focused on what I should be doing instead of what I actually want to do." I was taken aback. "You want to write?" She nodded. "I want to see where it could go. I don't know if it'll lead anywhere, but I need to try. For me." I could see the passion in her eyes, the excitement bubbling beneath the surface. This was important. She needed to do this. "I think it's amazing," I said, my voice sincere. "If this is something you want, you should go for it. I'll support you no matter what." Her relief was palpable, but there was still a trace of uncertainty. "I just don't want to be selfish. I don't want to put everything else on hold for something that might not even work out." I reached over and took her hand. "Sarah, I married you because I love all of you. Not just the parts of you that fit into what I think a perfect marriage should look like. I want you to chase what makes you happy. I'll be right here beside you, whatever happens." She smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you." The next few months were an exploration for Sarah. She signed up for a writing workshop, spent hours working on short stories, and even started a blog. I saw a new spark in her. The way she lit up when she talked about her writing. The way her eyes shone when she shared her progress with me. She was becoming herself again, in a way I hadn't realized she'd lost. But as Sarah began to find herself in her writing, I realized I was facing a shift of my own. I had always been the steady one, the one who kept things grounded, but I started to feel restless. I loved my job, but something was missing. I'd been so focused on supporting Sarah's dreams that I hadn't stopped to consider my own. One evening after dinner, I sat down with Sarah, a notebook open in front of me. I've been thinking, I began, running my hand through my hair. I've been so caught up in trying to make everything work for us that I haven't really asked myself what I want to do next. Maybe I need to take a step back and figure that out. She turned to me, her eyes soft. You know I'll always support you, right? I know, I said, smiling. I just think I need to figure out what makes me tick. I've been stuck in this cycle of work, 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 and I'm starting to wonder if that's the only way to live. Sarah leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. You deserve to chase your own dreams too, Ethan. We both do. It was a simple truth, but one that hit me like a revelation. We had been so focused on each other's growth, so absorbed in our love story, that we had forgotten to prioritize our own individual journeys. It was time for both of us to grow, not just together, but separately. Over the next few months, I took some time to explore different opportunities. I enrolled in a business course to learn more about starting my own company, something I had always dreamed of but never fully committed to. It was a risky move, but it felt like the right one. I could see the potential in myself that I'd been overlooking for years. Meanwhile, Sarah's writing took off in ways neither of us expected. Her blog gained a following, and soon she was publishing short stories and receiving invitations to write for online magazines. Her confidence soared as her passion turned into a tangible career. It was inspiring to watch her bloom. We continued to grow, individually and together. Our marriage became something deeper, not just because we were supporting each other's dreams, but because we had allowed ourselves the space to be individuals within that commitment. And as the months went by, I realized that the twists and turns of our journey were exactly what we needed to make our love stronger. Not every chapter would be easy. In fact, some would be incredibly difficult. But we were no longer just surviving. We were thriving. Together, but also as our own people. As Sarah sat beside me one night, sharing her latest story ideas, I smiled. I think we're doing okay. She laughed, leaning her head on my shoulder. Yeah, I think we are. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that we were exactly where we were meant to be. Just when we thought our lives were finally settling into a rhythm of mutual support and growth, the universe had one last, unexpected twist for us. It was a quiet evening. Sarah and I sitting on the porch of our little house, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunset. We had just returned from a weekend getaway to celebrate the success of Sarah's writing and my latest business venture. Life was good. We were on a high. But the phone call shattered the peace. The ring of my phone cut through the calm, and I glanced at the screen. It was from a blocked number. Something in my gut told me this wasn't a typical call. Hello, I answered, my voice low. There was a pause before a familiar voice came through, one I hadn't heard in months. Ethan, it's me, Jake. I froze. My mind raced as I turned toward Sarah, who had also noticed the shift in my demeanor. Her eyes widened, sensing something was off. Jake? I repeated, my heart pounding. What do you want? I don't know how to say this, but I have something I need to confess. Jake's voice was urgent, shaky even. And it's about Sarah. I shot a glance at her. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause, the kind that made everything feel impossibly heavy. Finally, Jake spoke again. I've been keeping something from you both. Something that's been eating at me. The reason I left. It wasn't just because of Sarah. It wasn't because I thought I couldn't be what she needed. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. It was because of her mom. My heart sank, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. Her mom? What does she have to do with anything? Jake hesitated before letting out a heavy sigh. I don't know how to say this, but I was in love with her, Sarah's mom, and I never told her. I never told anyone, not even Sarah. The world around me seemed to stop. I looked at Sarah, who had gone pale in the moonlight, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't process the words I had just heard. Wait, you were in love with Sarah's mom? I stammered, my mind reeling. Jake's voice cracked. I never acted on it. I couldn't. But when I saw how close you two were, how happy you made her, I couldn't handle it. It ate me alive. That's why I broke up with Sarah that day. And that's why I left without saying a word. I thought I was protecting her from the truth. But now I realize how much I hurt you both. I'm sorry. The silence on the other end was suffocating. I glanced at Sarah, who was visibly trembling. She was struggling to comprehend what I had just learned, her hands clasped tightly together. Jake, why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice strained. I don't know, he said, his voice small. I just needed to confess. I've been carrying this guilt around for so long. I thought maybe it would help to finally tell someone, but I don't know if it makes things better. Maybe it only makes everything worse. I stood up, pacing the porch, the weight of the revelation settling in. You don't get it, do you? I said sharply. You've done enough damage, Jake. This is a mess. The line went quiet, and then I heard a soft click as Jake hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief, the screen almost glowing in the darkness. I looked back at Sarah, who was frozen, staring at the ground. Her face was a mask of shock, her mind trying to piece together the unimaginable truth that had just been laid bare. Sarah, I whispered, my voice fragile. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and empty. How could he? She trailed off, her voice shaking. How could he do this? To me? To my family? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head as if trying to erase the words she had just heard. I thought I had put everything behind me, but now it's like nothing makes sense anymore. My own mother, Jake, all of this. It's too much. I took a step toward her, my heart breaking for her, but she pulled away, standing up and pacing across the porch. I need time, Ethan, she said, her voice cracking. I need time to process this. I need to understand why Jake kept this from me. Why my mom... Her words trailed off as she walked to the railing, gripping it tightly. I wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but I could see the pain in her eyes. The hurt was so raw, so deep, that I wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between us. This is a nightmare, she whispered, barely audible. I know, I said, my heart heavy. But we'll face